It is your PrisonPlanet.tv memberships that fund so much of what we do here in this operation. And then we're more than happy for the TV show after it's aired live, then be leaked out onto the web to tens of millions of people. That's our goal.
It is Monday, April 29th, 2013. I'm Jakari Jackson along with David Knight. This is the Alex Jones Radio Show. Alex Jones will be joining us at 11:40, so stay tuned for that just at the bottom of the hour. Also, we have guest host Gerald Celente, and Alex will be interviewing William Jasper from the New American, so definitely look forward to that. David, I see you have a few articles there.
Yeah, Jakari, we've got a lot of information breaking about the CIA's connection to the Boston bombings. There was one in particular, Uncle Ruslan, turns out, and this was covered on InfoWars, but actually I think the story was broken by Sibel Edmonds. I don't know. She covered it on Saturday, but she's actually been covering the CIA guy that's been associated with Uncle Ruslan for a long time. This is not news. He was actually on her rogue gallery that she had, American Deep State Rogue Gallery, and there were some gag orders put on her, but she's been writing about his connections to setting up Islamic false flag operations throughout Turkey and Chechnya and the Chaos Stan area, essentially, for quite a long time. We're going to be having an interview with Sibel on the nightly news tonight, so I want everybody to tune into that because it's going to connect a lot of dots, a lot of things that are not being reported by the mainstream media, but that all really kind of tie into this bombing. And like I said, this Graham Fuller, the CIA guy that has connections to Uncle Ruslan, is right at the center of all of that.
Exactly. So be sure to turn into the InfoWars Nightly News, 7 p.m. Central. David Knight will be hosting. Now, I just want to go over a few articles in this short segment. This is available on Infowars.com from Washington's blog. Multiple polls. Americans are more afraid of the government than terrorists. Now, since 9/11, we've seen people give up all kinds of liberties and the promise, and I just say the promise of security. But we have this article right here. It says, according to a pair of recent polls, for the first time since 9/11, the 9/11 terrorist hijackings, Americans are more fearful of their government than the abuses of terrorists. And you can see they want their constitutional liberties as well. The polls suggest Americans are hesitant to give up any further freedoms in exchange for increased, quote, security. And I like how the article says it right there. That's all it is the promise of security.
That's right.
So, David.
You know, I think it's interesting. If you look at this article a little bit further down, what it says is that right after the 9/11, it shot up to 71% people saying that they would give up their freedom for security, the promise of security. And then it kind of held there for a couple of years, and then it started dropping. And what's interesting about this poll is the timing. This was one day after the bombing, and it was pretty close, but there were, you know, it was like 45 to 43%, you know, that were, 45% said, no, we don't want to give up any liberties for this. So that was kind of interesting. The other thing I find interesting is the way that poll broke down. Democrats overwhelmingly still are buying the idea that government can make them safe, okay? 51% to 36%. Republicans were essentially equally divided. Independents was where our hope lies.
Yes.
Now, because the independents, it was only 29% willing to sacrifice their freedom for the promise of security. 58% said no.
And that's what we keep seeing. People are waking up. It's the paradigm shift. People are getting new information, new sources of information. They're turning away from the mainstream and going to alternative sources. And even InfoWars don't believe what we say. Go and check things for yourself. And speaking of people who took things into their own hands, I want to do this quick article, Dave, and we can come back with your thoughts. 30 arrested in New York during rally against drones. Now, this is at the Hancock Air Force National Base, and it says a group of people lying on the base's driveway were arrested. Charges include disorderly conduct, obstructing a government administration, and loitering. So it just makes me laugh that, you know, the simple act of lying on the ground non-combatively is now viewed as obstructing justice or disorderly conduct, I should should say, obstructing the government administration.
Look at what Bloomberg does in New York. I mean, I remember stories about people who couldn't smoke, guys who had a barbershop, they couldn't smoke in their shop, so they stood out in front of it, smoked a cigarette, then they got a ticket for loitering for a couple $100. So.
Golly. Okay, well, this is the end of the first segment. We'll be back right after this break with more news. All right, welcome back to the Alex Jones Radio Show. Jakari Jackson and David Knight sitting in. Alex will be joining us at 11:40, so stay tuned for that. If you're watching on PrisonPlanet.tv, you see the article right there. Bilderberg sleuth Jim Tucker dead at age 78. So our condolences go out to Jim and his family. Alex talked about it yesterday on the Sunday show. I'm sure we'll have more information coming up a little bit later on. So I'll throw back to David. David, you had more points you wanted to make on our last topic.
Yeah, you know, we were talking about people waking up and realizing that government was actually a bigger threat to them than terrorism. And the actuality of it is very true. When you go down and you look at the actual actuarian figures and see the likely cases of how people are going to die, it's a little known fact. But according to the U.S. Department of State, only 17 U.S. citizens were killed worldwide as a result of terrorism in 2011. That's the year that we have, most recent year we have statistics for. That includes deaths in Afghanistan and Iraq and everywhere where we're at war. Only 17 people.
And people will use that as a talking point. Well, that just shows TSA works. Well, TSA isn't really catching anybody, because even in situations like the underwear bomber, TSA didn't stop that guy. It was the passengers on the plane that jumped to action, not the TSA.
That's right. And as Alex has pointed out over and over again, you know, things like drowning is way up there. I mean, you have people that drown, that's like 18,000 people, okay? 1,000 times more likely to drown than you are to get, you know, hit by a terrorist attack. But of course, we all know it's things, diseases like heart disease, cancer, that sort of thing. That's really what you need to worry about.
Car accidents.
Exactly. But it is, you know, when it's the absurdity, just like we saw in Boston. One teenager with no military training or experience, and we find out he had no gun on him, and yet look at what they did in terms of martial law in Boston. That was to establish a pattern. That was to establish a pattern of the way the police can operate, and we're already seeing them repeat that pattern in various other cities. There were 2 other places where they did it just this last week. They're setting a pattern just like they did with SWAT teams. You know, that came in with a police chief in L.A., and everybody said, oh, look at this, and before you know it, it spread all across the country. We're going to see these types of tactics all across the country. Now is a time for people to get active at the state and local level. Find some representatives who are going to be on your side, or elect some who are going to be on your side, and start getting some accountability on police, and stop this militarization, and take it back another step and say, we're going to hold police accountable when they use tasers as whips, or they do other things, violence that we see no accountability happening at the local level now. But it's really going to get out of hand unless citizens get active and demand some accountability and some, essentially, an effective Bill of Rights, you know, from local police. It's what we really need to see happening now.
Exactly. Because people don't want to get active. They think, well, I mean, people have the idea that you can work at the national level, and you can. I do encourage you to contact your national representatives and such, but you have to get at the local level. You have to go talk to your sheriff and your police chief and your city councilman and your mayor. And if you're like us here in Austin, maybe they might not be the best representatives, but right. I mean, if you can, vote them out. Get some people in there who will do the will of the people, not the will of the feds or, you know, Joe Biden or whoever else. So, and speaking of Joe Biden, this dovetails over to the President Obama report. Obama spent twice as much time on vacation and golf as the economy. Now, this is out of Breitbart, and you can see that he spent more time on the golf course than he did in any type of economic meeting.
You know, I might say that might be a good thing, Jakari.
Maybe it was a good thing.
Maybe it's a good thing we don't get all the government that we pay for. You know, if I would hate to think if he was enacting a rigorous economic plan on us what that would look like. So let's encourage him to go golfing more.
Well, my deal is, you know, he spends all this tax money to go play golf with Tiger Woods and, you know, whoever else. And I don't know what all he has going, but then he sends his daughters on these $1 million spring break vacations to Mexico and so forth. And, you know, you got the Secret Service and, you know, guys hiding in trees trying to make sure nobody's trying to talk to him and all this stuff. It's just, it's over the top. It's a waste of money. Meanwhile, you can't take a tour of the White House because of sequestration. Yeah.
Well, they're royalty, you know. They're our American royalty. And they live a lifestyle, the rich and famous, and then some. It's just pretty amazing. You know, talking about money, this is an article that's on InfoWars. The more illegal immigrants that go on food stamps, the more money J.P. Morgan makes. How about that? It turns out they've made over $500 million just on processing fees for people who are getting food stamps and that sort of thing. So they get anywhere from 31 cents to $2.30 for every single person on food stamps. So they're making hundreds of millions of dollars off of this. And when you see this kind of thing happening, it's no wonder that you know, we have a welfare state. It's just like the welfare state, just like the military-industrial complex, is being run largely for the benefit of the big corporations and banks at the very top.
Right.
Just like you see a $500 million tank that the Army doesn't want. You see fighter jets that the Air Force doesn't want. You see a vertical takeoff and landing plane that the Marines don't want. And yet, you've got congressmen from both political parties pushing for these things that the military doesn't want. Why? Because it makes money for the people who are really running this. That's the military-industrial complex. You know, the Army doesn't want the tank. The Army doesn't want the war, most of them, right? Because they're going to be the ones who are going to be fighting and dying in it. But the wars and the tanks are what make the money for the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about.
And people, you know, they can't see the connection that these people make huge sums of money off of war. They don't make money in peacetime. You know, they have tanks and guns and bullets and other things that they profit off of, and people just can't wrap their head around the concept that maybe we're starting wars unnecessarily to push that type of agenda.
Well, think about it. It's a durable good, right? One of the problems that they have in the automobile industry is that they started making cars that were much more durable. They wouldn't wear out in just a couple of years, so they're not able to sell them that often. You go back to the 70s, it was only in Switzerland that they were making, not Switzerland, in Sweden, that they were making cars that would last for 11 years or whatever, right? But because of competition, Detroit started making cars that lasted longer, so they're having some problems. Now, if they were military-industrial complex type of mentality, what they would be doing, they'd be sending out agents to sabotage traffic lights and traffic signs so they could create accidents so people would die or whatever, but they'd have to replace those cars because that's what the military-industrial complex is doing when they manipulate foreign policy. And in the same way, we see the welfare state being manipulated for the benefit of bankers and big corporations. In this situation where J.P. Morgan is making $500 million, they have a flyer that they give to Department of Agriculture, gives out to people on food stamps, and in boldface underlined it says in Spanish, "You need not divulge information regarding your immigration status in seeking this benefit for your children."
And we talked about that a little bit yesterday. Yeah. And I gave the example, you know, I'm definitely against biometrics, but in the state of Texas, you have to get your fingerprints taken to get a Texas driver's license. I don't like it, but that's what I had to do. But we see in other states where they're telling immigrants, you don't have to give your fingerprints or whatever else, just come get your driver's license. And it's a similar thing with the entitlement programs.
Exactly. You cannot have an open borders and an open-ended welfare system, right? I remember years and years ago, they used to have this thing called a Nolan chart that they would do in the Libertarian Party, see where people were trying to get them out of this left-right paradigm. So it basically changes this straight line into a two-dimensional space. And they would have like 10 questions on personal liberty, 10 questions on economic freedom and that sort of thing. And one of the questions would be about open borders. And my position on it was you cannot have open borders. I mean, you cannot have open immigration unless you first end the welfare state. And it will bankrupt you. And that's basically what we have now, though, is that we have fully open borders. They've essentially opened the borders, but they are hyping up the welfare state to a new dimension. And what that means is that it's just making people who are working legally in this country, is burdening them, and it's also keeping people who really do need some help from being able to get it because of the massive amount of money that's being wasted and misdirected.
Oh, yeah, it's a huge amount misdirected and going to people who don't really need it. People can't get the assistance that they need. And, you know, it's like say we talk about entitlement programs, you know, if you need something temporarily, that's one thing, but you're not supposed to be on it to the point where you become dependent, lifelong recipient of this thing. And it's definitely hurting people because they don't want to get out, or they don't know how to work, maybe I should say. Yeah. You know, they're so entitled to getting their check in the mail every month that, you know, they don't know how to go out there and fill out job applications and, you know, work a 40-plus hour week and so forth.
Well, what's in it for the corporations like J.P. Morgan is, of course, money. But what's in it for the politicians, the reason they push this, is they want you to be dependent on them. And just as we said before, there's a left-right division here. And for the people on the right, they want to get you afraid of Islamic terrorism, even though, like we just said, only 17 people worldwide, including theaters of war, were killed by terrorists. They want you so afraid of terrorism and Islamicists that you're going to come running to them for safety. And for the people who are on the left, they want you dependent on them economically.
Right.
And so in both cases, politicians push this agenda because it empowers them and it takes power away from the people.
Exactly. Now I want to move to international news in our news blitz here. Now this article right here. Powerful blast injures up to 40 in Prague. A powerful explosion badly damaged an office building in the center of the Czech capital Monday, injuring up to 40 people. Authorities believe people still may be buried in the rubble. So definitely our thoughts and prayers go out to the people in that location.
That's something that it's amazing because Sibel Edmonds was talking about how Americans knew so little about Chechnya that they were thinking that the Chechen area was actually Czechoslovakia.
Oh, yeah.
And now we have a terrorist event in Prague, Czechoslovakia. So that's going to even make the American public more confused, I guess.
Exactly. Well,
get a map.
So let's take a look at some more. Israel points finger at Iran over drone from Lebanon. And this is what we've been hearing, that various drones are going to start popping up in various parts of the Middle East, or more drones, I should say. And we'll see, Israel believes that Iran's Revolutionary Guard was responsible for the unmanned drone launched from Lebanon that was shot down in Israel's airspace on Thursday. So you can see the helicopter right there. This doesn't show a drone. That's a helicopter, but it's something that's going on out there. And, you know, drones aren't just international. They're coming home. They already are home. They're on the U.S.-Mexico border, U.S.-Canada border. They're flying around. People say, why don't you use them to shoot Chris Dorner and shoot the guys in Boston? But we'll have more on this on the other side.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm here with Jakari Jackson, and we're filling in for the first part of the show, and Alex is going to be joining us in a little bit. He's going to have an interview with William Jasper from the New American, and the last hour of the show, we're going to have Gerald Celente, so don't miss that. Now, we were talking, and we mentioned it just briefly before in the first segment, about Jim Tucker passing away. Jim Tucker, of course, was a person who was on the trail of Bilderberg for decades, pretty much single-handedly. And you know, Jakari, when I think about Jim Tucker and his struggle for decades in obscurity, what it reminds me of is William Wilberforce, a guy who, if you go back and look at history and look at, it was chronicled in the movie Amazing Grace. He had some connections to the fellow who wrote that song. But William Wilberforce was somebody who, for decades in Parliament, tried to educate people about slavery. And he was pretty much by himself, and he was up against huge economic interests of the day. But he had to wake people up to the moral issues of slavery. And he was successful just before he died. And, you know, in a way, Jim Tucker did the same thing. Not only was he laboring in obscurity, but he was also trying to wake people up to slavery.
Right.
But it was waking us up to our own slavery, waking us up to the slavery that has put us in chains out of ignorance.
And people don't think that they're slaves. Like exactly. I heard the quote, the only reason Harriet Tubman didn't free more people because more people didn't know that they were slaves. Yeah. They're just used to living that way.
That's right. It's the normalcy bias. And so what Jim Tucker was trying to do was to wake up people to the powers behind what was going on. And we know now from documents that were leaked just a couple of years ago, we know that all the way back in 1955, they had planned the euro as a way of controlling that entire area. They had planned the unification of Europe to control it. And these are bankers. And they weren't doing this for benign reasons. They weren't doing this to make the area more efficient. They were doing it to destroy it so they could take control of it. And we see those plans coming out now. And for decades, he was the only one talking about that. Well, he passed away this just a few days ago, and Alex did a tribute to him because Alex knows him very well. And let's cut to that tribute right now.
Well, it's Sunday morning here at the end of April 2013, and I just got the word that my old friend Jim Tucker passed away. One of the last of the old gumshoe, straw hat journalists who was a sports writer until the 70s when he discovered writings by a man named Pegler for other newspapers who had exposed a private secretive cabal that had been meeting at Jekyll Island, Georgia, the same place they met in 1913 to establish the private Federal Reserve. And Jim, over the next 30-plus years, fought an uphill battle to expose the Bilderberg Group, with the media saying it didn't exist, just like J. Edgar Hoover tried to say that La Cosa Nostra didn't exist, organized crime, in the 50s. We all now laugh at that. But if it wasn't for trailblazers like Jim Tucker, we wouldn't know about the real top-of-the-pyramid global mafia, the Bilderberg Group. They've now released documents in Italy in their Supreme Court where the Bilderberg Group has been caught being involved in staged terror attacks and other organized crime activities. Documents have been leaked by WikiLeaks with Henry Kissinger saying we do illegal immediately, unconstitutional is harder. And thanks to Jim being ridiculed and attacked, but knowing he was right, he forced this out in the open. It's what one man can do in the beginning, and then others began to join him. And over time, we were able to expose this cabal, and now Rolling Stone magazine yesterday came out and said, we owe the conspiracy theorists an apology. There is a private corporate secret cabal, one world government, LIBOR and beyond. The entire world economy is manipulated for insiders. It is fascism. It is crony capitalism, the opposite of liberty. And we owe people like Jim Tucker a real debt of gratitude. And that's why I'm here in the Ozark Mountains. And I wanted to share the beauty of these woods with you out there as we remember Jim Tucker, demonized by the media. They said he was insane, he was a liar, but no, he was proven right. And now Bilderberg is mainstream news, and now the globalist can't operate in the dark. See, first they want to deny they exist, because once you have a debate with them, they will lose the debate because of the politics they're involved in. They're tyrants. So they wanted to just hide and make the world think that they didn't exist. But they can't do that anymore, thanks to people like Jim Tucker. And we continue to walk in his footsteps now. We continue to stand with Jim and continue his work and others' work exposing the New World Order, because men and women come and go. We're born into the world, we grow up, we die. But what matters is our body of work. And Jim Tucker's body of work will live on forever. And so this is basically my short eulogy to Jim Tucker, who was a great guy, a funny guy.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Radio Show. Jakari Jackson and David Knight filling in. Alex will be joining us this segment in just a few minutes, so stay tuned for that. We just saw the video, the eulogy, I guess you could say, of Jim Tucker by Alex Jones. And speaking of Bilderberg news, David Knight, you have some more information on that?
Yes, actually, it's an article from the New American, and we're going to be talking to William Jasper. Alex is going to be interviewing him, and this is an article that he wrote about a week ago, and it really ties in what we're talking about here. The Council on Foreign Relations had a meeting, and listen to this. They actually have a guy who is a director of a global governance program there, okay? And they had a conference that John Kerry went to, and this was covered in the article by William Jasper. And the title of the panel discussion was the G20 Prospects and Challenges for Global Governance. And, you know, global governance, when you look at this, the perfect beard for it is climate change, because that's a so-called global problem.
Right.
But it's also, they can also use a manufactured liquidity crisis, just like the Federal Reserve was created after the manufactured liquidity crisis of the 1907 crash. And we're coming up to the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve, so we need to take a look at the roots of that. But now we see the same sort of thing happening in Europe. And listen to this quote from this conference. This is from Ian Brimmer, who's president of the Eurasia Group, and they actually have this on video. He says, the EU is much more significant. There is a real subversion of sovereignty by the EU that works. There's a real subversion of sovereignty. Yeah. Keep that phrase. Yeah, repeat that to yourself over and over again. That's a good thing from the standpoint of the Council on Foreign Relations. And it's also a good thing from the perspective of the Bilderberg people, right? They're open about their intentions to subvert national sovereignty and to create a global government. Now, you can talk about the difference between global government and global governance. I would argue that that's a distinction without a difference. But we need to be aware of the fact that they have historically done this. You know, climate change is something that they've used to justify this, but it's also a global governance, but it's also been their MO to use liquidity crises, and that's what we see happening now in Europe with a vengeance.
And climate change is one of those big deals, because I believe Obama talked about it in his inauguration recently. Climate change being one of the driving forces behind his new campaign, besides, taking your guns and other civil liberties. And we see guys, Al Gore, many other people saying that, polar bears can't swim. Alex has, famously shown you those clips and so on. But that's the thing that they're going to push, because remember, it's global cooling, there was global warming, and then it was global cooling, and now if somebody spits on the sidewalk, that's climate change, and you have to give all your money to Al Gore. And my question to people when I meet people, like I talked to somebody at South by Southwest when we went out there, and I'm talking to this guy, and he's all excited, he's all pumped up. I just came from seeing Al Gore, talk about climate change. And I say, so you believe in climate change? He's like, oh yeah, you can't deny it. And he's like, we have pollution and we have all this stuff. And I was like, well, sir, we've always had hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and so on. And then he said, well, we have all this pollution. I was like, yes, we do have a pollution issue on this planet. But saying, because somebody throws away their pack of fries caused a hurricane doesn't make any sense. They
need to understand that actually, I was talking about how the bankers are using this, creating liquidity crises in order to restructure sovereignty. Actually, climate change is really kind of the same sort of thing. When you look at these carbon credits and these carbon exchange systems and everything, it's got a lot of similarities to the Federal Reserve. When you look at the private Federal Reserve, we pay them for the privilege of them printing our paper money. Okay, and we borrow money from them. Why should we borrow money? Why should we pay them to do this? That's a function of government. It's not a function of some private entity. And what Al Gore is looking to do on a global basis, and these other people, he's not the only one, but he's heavily into this. What they're looking to do is to set up some kind of a climate Federal Reserve, if you will, these carbon tax credit exchanges, so that you will pay them for the privilege of anything that you do in your life that generates heat or carbon or anything that you do. Essentially, you're going to pay a privilege fee to these private organizations. And, that's what they're looking to do. They're essentially trying to set up a Federal Reserve that is climate-based, that is carbon exchanges based. So they're going to get very, very, very wealthy off of that if everybody that engages in any kind of activity has to pay them an indulgence fee to do so.
Oh, yeah. And you tied that together very well, David Knight. I want to go on to something else before Alex joins us in the next couple of minutes. U.S. spy, quote, spy, held in Venezuela is a filmmaker, his lawyer says. A U.S. citizen detained by Venezuela on accusations of spying is a documentary filmmaker who had accreditation from the South American country's Electoral Council to observe elections this month, his lawyer said today. Timothy Tracy was arrested at Carsa's, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that, Simon Bolivar Airport on April 24th as he was leaving the country and charged yesterday with conspiracy, the use of false documents, and delinquent association. So there's a guy who's out there just trying to get to the bottom of what's going on out there. He's a documentary filmmaker. We've seen this other places with journalists and other people being detained, being killed. And this is just another guy, who's just out there trying to expose what's going on.
Well, it's hard to say. I don't want to. Yeah, I always throw the guy under the bus.
I always take these things with a grain of salt. This is, one of the earlier reports, so things may come out. But thus far, just going off this article, we have to, look into what this guy's doing out there.
But it is coming from Bloomberg. So.
Yeah, that's another big red flag. So
we don't know. I don't want to throw this guy under the bus. He may be genuinely be a documentary filmmaker. Who knows? I mean. The more we look at all this, like I said, we've got an interview coming up with Sibel Edmonds on the Nightly News tonight. And the more we look at all the CIA fingerprints all over this Boston bombing, and I tell you, listening to her series of Gladio Part 2, and if anybody doesn't know what Operation Gladio was, do yourself a favor and look it up, even if you just take the time to read a Wikipedia article. It's absolutely amazing, and it is very central to the idea of false flag terrorism. And what we see is that the campaign of terror that was going on in Italy in the 1970s was attributed to communist organizations, but it was really an attempt to stop the political gains that communists were having in Italy, and it was really carried out by NATO operatives pretending to be communists. And she argues that Gladio has been continuing in the Middle East, in Turkey, and in the Chaos-Stan areas, as Gary North is called. I believe it was Gary North that gave it that name. But she argues that that's been continuing on, and she did this series back in January, and it has a lot of ties now that we're seeing open up with this bombing narrative that just happened in Boston. So check out that interview tonight on the Nightly News.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited for that. And guys, let me know when Alex has joined us. I believe he's about ready. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to this next article. U.S. Navy experimenting with drones and blimps. They're going back to blimps to fight Caribbean drug smugglers. In the wake of budget cuts, the U.S. Navy is turning to older technology in the war on drugs. And you can see it right there, the blimp. I'm not sure if that's the current type of blimp that they're going to be using, but there's an image of it. So we see just more surveillance.
Well, when we talk about blimps, I think about bloated things, right? And if you want something that's bloated, let's take a look at what if they really want to stop drugs, they could stop like 90% of the poppy-based drugs by stopping the CIA from growing them in Afghanistan. Okay, and yet we see an article here from the New York Times where millions in CIA ghost money has been paid to Afghan president's office. They called it ghost money, he said, because it came in secret and it left in secret. So it's ghost money. But, you know, it's a known fact and it's been documented. If you don't believe the alternative press, you can look at the mainstream press, the New York Times. They've documented it over and over and over again, how the production of poppy seeds, and of course from that you get cocaine, heroin, a lot of, you know, hashish, a lot of different drugs are derived from poppies. That had essentially dropped to very, very low levels under the Taliban. When we came in, we actually have, the New York Times actually has pictures of American soldiers assisting with the production and transportation.
Yeah, I believe that was on Fox News. Geraldo was out there, and the guys were like, "We don't like growing this opium, but that's what we have to do. Otherwise, the farmers will come after us."
Yeah, right. Yeah, our hands are tied.
You guys can't take a couple farmers.
But it's we got to prop up their economy, and their economy is based on selling drugs to the United States. So let's jump it up. So it goes from like 10% of the world's supply to like 90% of the world's supply overnight.
All right, and I do believe Alex is ready. Alex, can you hear us?
Yes, gentlemen, I'm here listening to you talk about how our government controls the cocaine that comes from coca leaves down in Central and South America and is on record shipping it in. Then, of course, the opium that is then manufactured and turned into the stronger heroin, and that's a fact. Another one of those stubborn things that just hangs out there in plain public view, but for the ignorant, they just say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. The government wouldn't be arresting us and putting us in their private prisons if they were shipping the drugs in. Well, of course they make it illegal to make the market more lucrative so they can selectively arrest anybody that tries to compete with them. And I know that most of our listeners know this. Most of our listeners are aware of this, but there are just so many examples of this throughout history. And for the radio show, I know we've got a stack of special reports we haven't even gotten to yet from the last week that are on PresentPlanet.tv that we should air here on the radio, but there's just so much breaking news. We should do a whole report on the opium wars that came at the end of 100 years, roughly, of European occupation of China, and how they used China's foolish decision to make opium illegal as a way to take over city by city, the British with opium, and take over the police and the local constabulary. Because when you make something illegal that's highly addictive, I mean, think about this. This is how they legalize slavery today. They say, if we catch you using a product that's highly addictive, that we advertise in movies and TV, that we sell via prescriptions as well, the prescription version of, if we catch you using it, then we're going to put you in a prison. But then in many of these cities, the only jobs you've really got above McDonald's, if you're lucky, is selling drugs where you can make large profits. And then the police just kind of selectively, when they need to fill the prisons, go and arrest a few of the drug dealers. I mean, for the naive out there, there's two different worlds. More and more I realize. There's those of us that are aware and those of us that aren't aware. And then in between that are those that are predatory who are aware, who try to attack and demonize those of us that are moral, who are trying to stop what's happening and try to keep the other group in the dark. They try to keep them in the dark for life. And a great example of that is out of the Washington Examiner today up on Infowars.com. I got it from DrudgeReport.com. And it's national editorial, no federal endorsement for Southern Poverty Law Center. This is exactly what we should be talking about. And it turns out that shooters and killers and people take the news of Southern Poverty Law Center demonizing libertarians and conservatives and then go and shoot and attack and kill people. Floyd Corkins, 28, learns his fate July 15th when he returns to federal court in the District of Columbia for sentencing for his February 6th guilty plea for 3 felonies, including interstate transportation of a firearms and ammunition, assault with intent to kill while armed, and committing an act of terrorism while armed. He could be sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. We have that clip last week up on the site where he said, I did it. I went and attacked. Because this was a group that criticized homosexuality. Now, again, whether you agree with that or don't agree or are neutral on the subject, the point is it's people's free speech. They shouldn't be attacked. I mean, my God, they're teaching kids, you know, how to masturbate at age 5 via the federal government. I mean, that's pedophilia, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. But see, you still don't say that anybody should go shoot Jocelyn Elders for pushing that years ago. Absolutely not. We should shoot her down with the words, with the truth, not with a gun. Even if he gets only half that much jail time, Corkins will forever be known for entering the Family Research Council's Washington headquarters on August 15, 2012, and firing 3 shots before being subdued by a wounded security guard. And he went on to say he did it because of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and there have been other attacks and things that go on. And, you know, my point is the Southern Poverty Law Center, it came out in federal court documents that Jesse Trinity sued and got. The different newspapers, especially in Salt Lake, reported on this a few years ago. He was able to get the documents in federal lawsuits over his brother's death, and also because of Carol Howe and other informers that blew the whistle, that the Southern Poverty Law Center was running the command base that was in command of McVeigh, who himself was another Pentagon infiltrator who they just set up. And see, why did I say watch the Boston bombers be on CIA payroll and being flown around and being protected by the State Department in the stands, Dagestan and other areas? Because they don't even let you go there and come back, basically, nowadays, unless you're part of that. It turns out, sure enough, they were. That's the big elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about. I mean, bare minimum, they were allowed to attack, and they knew that they were extremist nutballs, and they protected them. That's now come out, you know, 4 different, first it was 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 federal agencies knew and stood down. Boom, false flag, period. You know somebody's going to do something, you open the door for them, you help them, you're involved. It's a false flag to take liberty and freedom and distract the public. But getting back to this, Southern Poverty Law Center comes off like a bunch of, you know, dope-smoking, trendy hippies. That's kind of their public face. I even ran into one of their employees one time, and he was like, oh, we're not that bad. We're just hippies. And I'm like, don't give me that crap. He goes, well, actually, we do spend like $30 million a year in security alone. They get hundreds of millions of dollars. I forget the number. It's in the hundreds of millions. Guys, pull up annual. But I think maybe in like 5 years, they got something like $200 million from the feds. I forget the exact number. The point is that it's their job to go out and demonize anybody that's a liberty lover. And then clearly they have sister organizations via the FBI, like Hal Turner, who I said for a decade was definitely an FBI asset. Because he would say, kill judges, kill people. By the way, go after Alex Jones almost every time he broadcast. And some of the most vicious people coming after me were mentally ill white supremacists wound up by Hal Turner, who is now in federal prison because when hackers got into his email and released the fact that he was a, quote, national security asset above FBI, speaking to through the FBI to a group above FBI. That's Justice Department. That's Eric Holder and his cutout group in my research. Groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center that are at Justice Department and above, because they use foundations that can act outside of oversight to basically get away with anything. And so again, when those hundreds of emails got released with him being handled by the FBI, that's how lazy they are. Like people wouldn't find out that he was he wasn't going to a park to get his orders in a satchel like you're supposed to if you're one of these operatives historically. You just do it via email, and there he was trying to wind up. That's what they called it. Mentally ill extremist ex-cons and people to do bad things. And of course I knew he was a Fed, attacking me every day, saying kill judges over and over again for years, never getting in trouble. I mean, most people that attack us, you go look them up and they're saying blow up the Federal Reserve. I mean, if I said that, there'd be police cars in an hour wherever I was. I mean, police cars, boom, handcuffs gone, because I'm not a globalist. I'm not a Fed. And they would know, oh, we don't control that. Alex isn't a Fed. But when they do this stuff, they get away with it. So it shouldn't just not get federal funding. It shouldn't just not get federal funding in the hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. It should be investigated by Congress, because this is the group trying to radicalize politics and demonize anybody that is anywhere near a constitutionalist, anyone that admires freedom. They are authoritarians posing as liberals. We'll be right back with a bunch of other key news on abortions and how they're trying to cover up the grisly facts. Okay, folks, Jakari Jackson, David Knight will be riding shotgun a little bit with me in the next hour. They're kind of like Houston, and I'm up here in the space capsule. If there's any technical difficulties, they'll pop in. Also have some news updates. William F. Jasper, I don't have his bio in front of me, but I know he's been editor of the New American from time to time. He is going to be joining us coming up, because he wrote an article last week for the New American magazine dealing with the EU and bankers bragging that they're an authoritarian system. So I think it's important to get him on to talk about kind of the history of the John Birch Society, too, that's been so demonized. They just count on you being dumbed down. And, oh, that's that discredited group. Like, Alex is discredited. We didn't buy any bullets. Or, yeah, we bought a bunch of bullets, but it's no big deal. Yeah, they're discredited because the bullets aren't to shoot you. Now, getting back to the Southern Poverty Law Center, they have the expanded definition of hate. And I went to SourceWatch. Their assets are at $189.7 million, and they've been known to raise over $100 million a year, according to their 501c3 tax filings I'm looking at from sourcewatch.org. So I knew those hundreds of millions numbers were accurate. So it's $189 million in assets, 0.7. They get fundraising, but also federal funds. And just a few weeks ago, we saw the Fox News article showing the Army manuals saying all Christians, Catholics, evangelicals, you name it, are next to Al-Qaeda and are extremist terror organizations. That's Fox News. And I recognize the flyer graphics, because I've seen it in so many federal documents, at Southern Poverty Law Center. About 80% of the time, it's their their documents with a new name on it. And then about 15, 20% of the time, it's ADL. And I've learned how they look. They're very lazy. I mean, you just keep regurgitating the same lies. And the expanded definition of hate is families are hateful. Being white in and of itself is hateful. Of course, they're mainly white. It's just all about divide and conquer. They're the ones selling racial division. And now you've got Billy Graham's son pushing their line. You've got the Southern Baptist Convention. Might as well just come out for the Communist Party USA. This is the takeover. They're all moving right now in their cultural revolution. By the way, it's not going too well for them. The problem is they're in power, so they're getting what they want done while waking everyone up. And David, you've done some reports on this specifically, where they've then had Army colonels come out and vomit Southern Poverty Law Center trash all over everyone. Tell folks about that.
Well, just a couple of weeks ago, we had an email that surfaced that attacked both the American Family Association and the Family Research Council. And the Family Research Council is the organization that you led off with, that this guy who was inspired by the Southern Poverty Law Center went in and started trying to shoot people up. And this Lieutenant Colonel Jack Rich sent out an email to his subordinates. It was quite a lengthy list of subordinates that he sent this out to, warning them about specific groups. And one of the first couple ones he warned about were the Family Research Council and the American Family Association. He said they were hate groups. He said they didn't share Army values. And what he was doing was linking them together with the Westboro Baptist people, who truly, in my opinion, is a very hateful group. They're the ones who show up.
Oh, come on, I bet a lot of money those guys are federal funded.
Yeah, right. But
I mean, I've seen long extended films of them, and it's definitely a big act.
But it's really crazy. You know, Westboro Baptist Church or whatever, they're absolutely insane. But the American Family Research, the American Family Association, the Family Research Council are very mainstream evangelical Protestant organizations, and they are not hate organizations, but they're labeled as such because
they're also now more and more getting shot up. And the people say they did it, because of the Southern Poverty Law Center groups affiliated with that.
But here's the interesting thing is that they asked for, and I don't believe they've gotten an apology from either that Lieutenant Colonel, Jack Rich, or from the Pentagon disputing what he said, because, of course, we've seen report after report from
What is the Pentagon involved in rural affairs? What is the Pentagon in the Rural Council? What is the Pentagon doing saying Christians are bad, Army don't look at it? This is a domestic, hardcore, collectivist takeover, communist funded by offshore banks that want to break this country. And whether it's the Army, the FBI, or local police, they are all trained by open, un-American scum who now are going after mainline Christians. We'll be right back. All right, we're into hour number 2. I'm on the road. Jakari Jackson and, of course, David Knight doing a great job. I'm going to be back by Wednesday, but we're going to have Mike Adams in for 3 hours. On Wednesday, I'll probably be popping in there as well. And I'm not sure what we're going to do on tomorrow's show. I may do it from the road, driving in the bus like I did before. One time from the front seat of the bus next to Richard. So we're going to see what happens tomorrow. But there's so much breaking news. If you go up to Infowars.com, George W. Bush suggests Boston bombings were a conspiracy. Pretty powerful video. I thought he said never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. U.S. moves closer to military intervention in Syria. That's Kurt Nemo's article. They're already doing military intervention with proxies. They mean overt military bombing. And, you know, after they do their deal with Russia, they like kind of stage an event, blame their own assets, let the Russians clean out the CIA's own people. You give us Syria, we'll get our people out of Dagestan. I mean, this is just amazing. It's like Hitler and Stalin dividing Poland or something. That's how government works. I agree with Seabell Edmonds' breakdown on that a few days ago. Mother of bombing suspect says it's all lies. That's all up at Infowars.com. Multiple polls, Americans are more afraid of government than the terrorists. That's right, but the government has electronic voting in now, so I guess it doesn't matter what you want unless you enforce the Constitution. And that's just some of what's going to be coming up. William F. Jasper is going to be joining us. But putting bookends on this, David Knight, we were talking about the Southern Poverty Law Center that Harper's wrote about in 2007, and they got their tax returns, 501c3, $189.7 million, a lot of it government funding. Approximately 68% of their total expenses were spent on program services. They live like kings. In 2009, that's the latest numbers. And they still, every professional I know, you know, my dad's a dentist, every lawyer he knows, gets mailed the magazine, which I'm always in, or almost every time I've seen it. It's a quarterly magazine where they put toothless Klan members run by feds next to mainline Christian groups, some of the biggest in the country. I mean, they just say, hey, we shouldn't teach 5-year-olds how to masturbate. And they're like, these people are evil. And then the guy goes in and shoots them, and it's like, so what? We're liberal. I mean, it's just over the top. And again, they're here for an authoritarian takeover. I'm not just saying that. David Knight, final comments on that before I come back and talk to Jasper.
I think what you said earlier, Alex, is the key. You got to ask yourself, not only why would the Army attack mainstream organizations like the Family Research Council and the American Family Association, but why is the Army doing this? Why? It's kind of like when you saw the Waco, when that was unfolding, we were told that they had to do that to protect the children and that there were child abuse charges. It's like, that's not the jurisdiction of the federal ATF.
They could have arrested him in town every day. They wanted the big fight.
Exactly.
They wanted to kick off the domestic purge. They hate gun-owning Christians, so they picked a weird group to set the precedent.
Right.
These people just don't want power. They hate us.
It's the same sort of thing here. It's the same sort of thing here. You got to ask yourself, why is the Army weighing in on this? Why is the Army telling people that the Family Research Council and the American Family Association are hateful groups, that they're hate groups, and they don't share Army values? Why is
By the way, they're incredibly milquetoast. They're incredibly milquetoast. I mean, look, the Army document 3 weeks ago, Fox News says evangelicals, who, by the way, are worshiping the Southern Poverty Law Center, and all Catholics are extremists next to Al-Qaeda. I mean, where are the Catholic groups up in arms about this?
Right. Yeah.
That's a big group to say all the Catholics, period.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's the thing. That along with, and we've seen this happening over and over again. We've seen Army manuals where they're wargaming in South Carolina against the Tea Party. We see the MIAC report that was broken by InfoWars back in 2009. We see this narrative coming over and over again, and you have to ask yourself, you know, not only do we have a standing army now, permanent professional standing army, which is against Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, but now they're definitely turning their sights on the American people.
That's right. They're demonizing us, saying we're the bad guys. And then we say, hey, what are the armored vehicles and machine guns and checkpoints and bullets for? They go, that's a conspiracy theory. Don't run. We are your friends. All right, coming up at the bottom of the hour, we'll have more breaking news from Infowars.com and other top liberty-minded sites around the world. Right now, though, for the balance of the hour, we are joined by William F. Jasper. He is the senior editor at the New American magazine, thenewamerican.com. And, of course, he also is their main correspondent to the United Nations. He travels all over the world. And, of course, I followed his work earnestly when I discovered it in about 1993, 94, 95. The John Birch Society films that were aired on local access TV helped expand my awakening. I kind of grew up around history and things, so just knew what they were saying was true because it was verifiable in the, even by the time I was 20 years old, hundreds of history books I had read. And the first time I met William F. Jasper personally, I had him on as a guest a few times, was at Operation Urban Warrior, where the military was openly training with role players to confiscate guns in California. And I was there shooting video of the Navy vessel Coronado dumping out thousands of Marines and troops from 5 nations. And I'd go into, they'd say, sure, you can come in with the press. And they would sit there and train and say, where'd you get the guns and ammo and the helmet? Well, I got it in San Francisco. And then they'd have a Colonel Jones run up and say, Jones can't film that. Get out of here. They'd go, but sir, you said he could be here. So, and then Colonel Hart would run up on video and get very upset. So they did not want people seeing what is in Police State 2000. So the first time I met Jasper then. Now, the John Birch Society, I want to get him on today just to do a brief history of it. I'm not a member of it, never been part of it, just because, you know, I've read their material. I guess I'm kind of a, to use the communist term, but in a joking way, a fellow traveler. I grew up with my dad having their publications and Bobby Vaughn, a John Birch Society member in Dallas, coming over when I was a kid, you know, and I'd hear him around the coffee table drinking coffee, talking about the New World Order, the Federal Reserve, the plan to destroy the family, the plan of the mega banks to create world communism that they're exempt from, basically everything we see today. And I want to get him on about an article he wrote last week that we linked to on Infowars.com, dealing with the EU bragging that, oh, yes, we're taking over in an authoritarian way. They've also done that in the Financial Times of London bragged in an article called And Now for World Government, where they said, yes, we've been secretive, yes, we're authoritarian, yes, we're taking over, and yes, there's nothing you can do. So they've gone from denying all of this to saying, okay, you're discredited because you don't want world government. It's kind of like a year ago when they'd only bought 1 billion bullets. Now it's over 2 billion. There are no billion bullets. There are no armored vehicles. There are no manuals training to take on the American people and veterans and gun owners. Now they're like, of course there are manuals to take you on. And of course we have 2 billion bullets, but they're not to kill you. That was the new thing in Congress last week. We played clips on the Sunday show. So if you've ever noticed when you watch MSNBC or CNN, when somebody talks about freedom or somebody talks about sovereignty or somebody talks about NAFTA and GATT, admitted things, or the Trans-Texas Corridor, they'll go, Ron Paul is insane. That NAFTA highway doesn't exist, even though Texans see it being built and saw the billboards. They're playing to your ignorance. But you'll always see them, who they're really scared of, saying, oh, that sounds like something from the John Birch Society, and then they'll laugh. And that's an appeal to emotion for ignorant people watching to go, well, when I hear the word John Birch, I better laugh. The truth is, the John Birch Society, if you watch the things that Mr. Welsh said back in the 50s when it was founded, when you watch the things they put in the little blue book that I read when I was about 18, all of it has come true. Not because they were pressing it. They had good patriots in the military, in the FBI, in the Congress, who were in the hearings where this was all being announced. They tried to get this all done in the 50s and 60s when they thought the public would totally trust the government after World War II. People did trust the government, leave it to Beaver. This was all announced. Getting rid of our military, creating a UN military via NATO. So I want to give him the floor now for the rest of the hour to, as best I can. This stuff really gets me excited. William F. Jasper, to kind of this little 5-minute segment left, talk about the John Birch Society, talk about how right they've been, and why they've been so demonized, and it almost put them on the defensive for a while. You know, I've had their director in studio kind of admit that. They need to get off the defense, get on the offense. So what when traitors sit there and attack you and say you're a liar? They're the liars. I mean, that's a sign, and now people don't believe the lies anymore. And then get into what the EU's forming into, what the New World Order is from its deep research, because this is, you know, the head honcho over there at their publication, and just really does amazing research and has been at all these major UN events or sent his sub-correspondents to it. And then how things are going. After we talk about the history of JBS, then talk about the current state of world government, and then how it's going for them, where he sees things going. William F. Jasper of TheNewAmerican.com, we salute you, and we're honored to have you, my friend.
Well, thank you, Alex. Pleasure being here with you. The setup you gave me here, I'll just walk right into that. Probably a lot of your listeners are familiar, at least to some degree, with the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society publishes the New American Magazine, of which I am the senior editor and UN correspondent and kind of chief cook and bottle washer. My entry into this is probably similar to a lot of members of the John Birch Society, at least of my generation. I graduated from college in 1975, but while I was in college my last couple of years, my parents had become members of the John Birch Society, and when I found out about that, I was shocked. I was dismayed. I was completely perplexed. How could this happen? Because I knew nothing about the John Birch Society, except that somewhere in my deep subconscious, I had this image of the John Birch Society as being a very evil fascist organization, racist organization, somehow connected with the Ku Klux Klan or something like that. And I found out that a lot of my other friends on campus, colleagues, had pretty much the same impression. And so I thought, well, I had better educate my parents. They're good people. They certainly aren't fascists. They were both World War II veterans, fought against the Nazis over in Germany and France, etc. My mother was an Army nurse. My dad, 82nd Airborne paratrooper. Good patriotic people. My job as the college-educated son to educate them. And so I started discussing this with them. They gave me a whole stack of literature. At that time, the John Birch Society magazine was American Opinion. The monthly magazine, the weekly magazine was the Review of the News. They gave me a stack of those.
So you thought you were going to straighten them up with all your Rockefeller Foundation-funded college schooling, and they actually straightened you up.
Right. I mean, they gave me a whole stack of books by Ludwig von Mises and Henry Hazlitt and Friedrich Hayek, and I started reading all those. And I'd been studying economics, and I thought, my gosh, how come I've never been exposed to this? These are top-notch world-level economists, free market economists, and why haven't I been exposed to this? And so I began doing a lot of research, and it was very hard for me to overcome the biases that I had built into me already. But I spent a lot of time at the university library checking the footnotes, making sure that things weren't being quoted out of context. And I found myself being reluctantly re-educated. And I thought, gee, a lot of this makes sense. They're calling for constitutional government. They're calling for getting back to constitutional government. They're calling for America. That's right. That's right. And they're not only opposed to communism and socialism, but fascism, Nazism, any of the collectivist ideological movements and parties. And wasn't John Birch Society's big evil opposing the Vietnam War rightly? Oh, that's so fascist. Right, and they were opposed it. The John Birch Society opposed it not for the same reasons that the SDS and the leftists were opposing it. I mean, those people were calling for a Viet Cong victory. The John Birch Society said, no, it's wrong for us to be over there supporting, or rather pretending to fight communism there while we were allowing Castro to build a dictatorship right here at our doorstep. They rightly understood that it was Hegelian dialectic with the globalists playing both sides of it. Talk about the name John Birch Society for people that don't know the story. Well, John Birch was a Baptist missionary just preceding World War II over in China. And long story short, he had learned Chinese and then various Chinese dialects. He could identify very well with the Chinese people there. When World War II broke out and the Japanese invaded China, all of the foreign missionaries left, except for him. He stayed behind, disguised himself as a Chinese, traveled all over China. When we entered into the war, he began, and Jimmy Doolittle began doing his flights over China, bombing the Japanese thing. American pilots were being shot down or were being forced to abandon their planes. And he developed a network to have amongst the Chinese there to build landing strips and to have smuggling operations to get the American pilots back out of China so that they could fly again. And so he was a hero all over China. The Japanese were after him, trying to capture him. He was highly decorated. He was very brave, incredible man, incredible story. Robert Welch wrote the book about him, The Life of John Birch, which is available. But at the end of the war, he was given one last commission. He was a missionary, but he was commissioned as a captain in the U.S. Army because of his intelligence capabilities there. And he was given one last mission, which was to go up northern China to escort out the Japanese army so that they wouldn't be, after the armistice, so they wouldn't be molested. And he was stopped by the Chinese communists.
All right, let's stop right there. We've got to go to break. I want to come back and finish that story so you understand where the John Birch Society came from when these enemies of liberty just demonize them and say lies about them with no proof. Understand why, because they know it's a real organization trying to defend this republic. And without them, folks, Ron Paul and myself, we would not have known all this info. I'm telling you, they were the launch pad for the entire giant resistance today. And everybody should be a part of the John Birch Society, or at least get their materials, because they're the best you're going to find anywhere. We'll be right back. Stay with us. I'm Alex Jones. Fitting music to talk about the John Birch Society helping get the Flying Tigers into there to fight the Japanese. And then, of course, at the end of the war, it was the John Birch Society that first said in the 50s that Mao had been put in power by our government. That was declassified about a decade ago. I was watching Discovery Channel, or was it History Channel, and they had the old CIA section chief admit it. And then I went and looked it up. There'd been an announcement in the news that, oh, the government thought Mao would be a stabilizing effect, the greatest mass murderer in history. But we'll talk about what happened to old John Birch when he tried to actually help the Chinese people he loved so much against tyranny. Okay, so he's helped defeat the Japanese against the millions the Japanese killed. Incredible war crimes there that dwarf what happened to the U.S., or even the Koreans, for that matter, that the Japanese viciously attacked. I'm not demonizing Japanese now. That's just Imperial Japan were like the Nazis. Now, expanding, go ahead and finish with what happened. William F. Jasper, editor-in-chief over there, senior editor over there at the New American Magazine.
Captain John Birch was sent to escort out the Japanese army out of northern China. And on his way there, he was stopped by Chinese communist troops and was murdered by them. And that is not surprising, because that's what communists do. But remember, this is the end of World War II, and Americans, or the triumphant victors, could be very bad news to kill an American hero. I mean, John Birch should have received numerous additional citations, to which he did receive, and probably would have gotten Medal of Honor, things of that nature, except for this murder was covered up. Why was it covered up? Our State Department, which was being run by communists at that time.
Wasn't he also tortured?
Verified since then.
Wasn't he also tortured?
Yes, he was tortured, bayoneted, and murdered. And this wouldn't fly very well, though, with our State Department and our government, Roosevelt and Truman administrations, trying to convince the American people that the Chinese communists under Mao Zedong and Chu Te were our allies, going to be the people that we should be turning China over to, which is what we did. They began demonizing Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government, building up Mao Zedong. And so they had to keep this hidden. And Robert Welch, who is the founder of the John Birch Society, who he was still in his manufacturing. He was had a big candy making company. He had the Sugar Daddy or Sugar Babies, or he's the guy that invented those, and he had poured all of his money into alerting the American people about the dangers of socialism and big government here at home, and of communism abroad. Now, for younger generations today who don't even know who Stalin or Mao or Fidel Castro is or were, and have no idea about the climate in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, 70s, when communism was taking over one country after another, that might be hard to fathom. But Americans at that time understood that there was something really bad in the world. There's this world revolution going on where totalitarianism was being fastened on one country after another. Millions of people were being slaughtered and tortured and imprisoned. So Robert Welch was founded an organization. He named it after John Birch because he saw that Captain John Birch was an exemplary American who embodied everything that this country was great about this country, and had been, as he said, was the first victim of World War III. After World War II, the big war for the world, communist totalitarianism, was underway, and John Birch was the first victim. And so he
and by the way, the globalists, as you know, decades later, now call that World War III. And so, again, just so much that John Birch envisioned has actually become even mainline nomenclature in the technocracy.
Yes. Well, one of the things that Robert Welch recognized, and this is the reason why he and the John Birch Society were so demonized by the same mainstream media, the MSM-controlled corporate media, is that he was exposing the larger picture, and that is that communism wasn't succeeding, and all these millions of deaths were not just the result of the communists being so powerful and cunning and adept at taking over. They had indisputable, absolutely necessary help in the highest positions of power in some of the free world countries, particularly.
All right, stay there. I want to finish up with that and then leap forward to the grandchildren and sons of and daughters of these globalists, what they're doing today. Now they're out in the open, and what's currently happening and what you see happening in the future with William F. Jasper, straight ahead of the New American Magazine. I'm Alex Jones. All right, my friends, we are back live. William F. Jasper is our guest till 5 after next hour, and then I'll introduce Gerald Celente at 8 after. He's gonna guest host the broadcast today. Very excited to have Gerald Celente, one of our most popular guests and very informative gentleman, doing that. A bunch of things that are happening here. We can thank another station turning the show on, KSET 1300 AM in Beaumont, Texas. We're excited to have them joining the team. KSET 1300 AM will be airing the live weekday show starting in just a couple days on May 2nd. So I'll plug them then. And also, we have a lot of stations that are now carrying the show twice a day, and also some stations going 24 hours a day, like Jacksonville, Florida. As always, we want to thank all of those AM and FM affiliates out there for carrying the broadcast. Also, we're not funded by stimulus money or banker bailout money like General Electric funding MSNBC. We are 100% funded. We're not funded by the Koch brothers funding the kind of fake right wing either, which we were, because I'd take money and fund liberty, period. If there's no strings attached, here, bring it, give it to me. But I'm being sarcastic. The point here is we're funded by you buying books, videos, T-shirts, ball caps, clicking on our sponsors. We're funded by you spreading the word about the broadcast. We're funded by you supporting our local AM and FM stations, supporting those local sponsors. It really helps to let shops know you're coming in because they sponsor the show, or if you're a business to become a sponsor. That's how we fund this operation. I'm hiring more reporters. I'm getting satellite feeds. You see what we're doing. A year ago, I cut that ad saying, we're going to the next level. I am going to go 110%. That's why I got black circles around my eyes. And I've been working 18 hours a day, many, many days, 3-4 days a week for the last year. And I have sworn on the altar of God, eternal resistance against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. And sometimes I do it in a ham-fisted way, but folks, pray for me. I'm doing the best I can. And, you know, God works in mysterious ways, so thanks for putting up with me. But I am your humble servant here in Liberty. I love my children. I want them to be free. I want them to live in a world with your children, and I want them to grow up and have grandchildren who have grandchildren, and we'll go to the stars together if we don't let the king rat scum take over. We're going back to Jasper here in a moment to give him the real floor. He's just breaking down amazing history here to understand what's brought us to this point, a snapshot of those that came before us. And we stand on their shoulders. Don't forget, you can also buy the Pro Pure water filtration, 10% off with promo code WATER, the best gravity-fed stainless steel filters out there. I went out and found the best. It's what I and my family use. It's what we use on the road in the RV. It is the best, the lowest price, InfoWarsStore.com with promo code WATER. You can also call and get it with that same promo code, 888-253-3139, 888-253-3139. Don't forget, you can also subscribe and get 11 memberships for the price of one, $5.95 a month, Operation Awakening the Sleeping Giant. That's 11 memberships for $5.95 a month. That's 55 cents a piece. Buy one master membership and share it. That just pays for the bandwidth. And then also, please don't forget the new magazines arrive tomorrow. We have just sold out of the April issue. So the new magazines arrive tomorrow, 110,000 of them. Each magazine has 3 Infowars.com stickers. One of them says Save the Constitution. The other says Infowars.com. The other says PrisonPlanet.com. The average bumper sticker gets seen by 20,000 people, they estimate, on some of the marketing sites I've read. 20,000, at least if they're on a car. A little bit less if it's on a book bag or something else. The point is 20,000 people. Let's say it's 1,000 people. The point is, this is an aggressive operation. Please get the new magazine, give it to friends and family, and then also put the bumper stickers on your own property or give it to others to put on their own property. Please don't put it on anybody else's property, though I'm sure provocateurs will do that. That's not our problem. Again, ladies and gentlemen, duty is ours. Consequences belong to God. InfoWarsStore.com. And don't forget, we've launched the new InfoWars Seed Center. And don't forget the New American magazine, also very important to support those patriots as well. We'll tell you how to subscribe before Jasper leaves. Okay, we've got like 14 minutes left in this segment, then 5 minutes, then another 5 minutes. Then we've got Gerald Celente coming up at 8 after. But we've got William F. Jasper here. Finish up with you had just gotten to the point of trying to, basically put Mao in, and then discovering that there were ultra-rich funding communism while using it as a dialectic to build a police state here, and then get into the current EU stuff you've been breaking and their own admissions, and then where you see us going, where you think the battle is, because I really respect your perspective as somebody who's been in this battle for 30 years, William F. Jasper.
Thank you, Alex. Actually, it's almost 40 years now.
Wow.
37. So, we were talking at the end there, huge momentous shift in the whole planet following World War II, with communism taking over much of Europe, much of Asia, including all of China, and then that was happening at the same time that the United Nations was being founded, the incipient world government that was founded in 1945. Now, you and I were brought up in schools, I believe, until I went away to college. Actually, while I was in college, and I became familiar with the John Birch Society, that the United Nations was this glorious, wonderful, great big brotherhood of man that was founded at the end of World War II, because the people of the world decided we couldn't have war anymore because of the atomic bomb. We had to find a way of getting past all our differences, so we'd all join hands and sing Kumbaya, and we'd join together at the United Nations, and we'd all live in peace, harmony, brotherhood. At least that was the aspiration, or so we were told. Nothing of the kind. As I began looking into the first big disillusionment for me was Gerald Griffin's book, The Fearful Master, A Second Look at the United Nations. You've had on your program, I'm sure. But that just began a big transformation for me, an understanding that really right from the very beginning we had two major forces working together hand in hand to build this United Nations into a world government which would be tyrannical. And the two hands that were joined together were, first of all, the communists. Stalin's agent, Vyshensky, was the main guy involved from the Soviet Union in putting together the Charter of the United Nations. The guy on our side, supposedly, was Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss, of course, was a Soviet agent himself. But he was also an agent for a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was, in fact, the protege of one of the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations, John Foster Dulles, former Secretary of State. And so we had the Council on Foreign Relations and the communists working together to put this organization into place, which would eventually assume global legislative, executive, and judicial powers. It would be empowered with a police force and an army, and that is under process right now. But we saw right at the very beginning, not only Alger Hiss, but Harry Dexter White, another Soviet agent, and he was there at the founding conference. He became head of the International Monetary Fund, and then he was followed by Virginius Frank Coe, another CFR member of the Communist Party, who finally left and went to live in China. But the International Monetary Fund is still with us, as is the United Nations. And in fact, the International Monetary Fund, this is one of the areas I've been writing extensively on for the last several years, is the big push by the Council on Foreign Relations and their other adjuncts around the world to transform the International Monetary Fund into a Federal Reserve of the world, to give it all of the powers that we now have in the Federal Reserve to control the monetary and fiscal policy of the world. And
you wrote that something like 25 years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, and now it's mainstream news, but we're still kooks if we talk about it. I mean, it's just amazing. What is it like for you? I've got to ask this. To now see everything that Welch talked about 50 years ago actually come true exactly as he said. I mean, what incredible intelligence JBS had back then. I mean, I don't think we would have had any chance if it wasn't for you guys. I hate to sit here and...
the same frustration, I know, but for those of us that have been trying to inform the American people about this all along, only to be chastised as kooks and fearmongers, etc. I mean, many other people, though, are beginning to see through that, because the Tea Party and every other conservative organization, religious organization, if you're opposed to any of the agenda, and it's sweeping across, the agenda is to completely transform the United States, to destroy all morality, destroy our economy, to force us into interdependence, to destroy our national sovereignty, and that's being stripped away from us right now as we see more and more of these United Nations treaties, the law of the sea, what they're trying to push through with the Global Arms Treaty, with all of the global environmental treaties and agreements. I was at the Earth Summit in 1992 and saw and reported on all of the things of Agenda 21, the Biodiversity Treaty, and the global warming back then. And so it's frustrating to be years or decades ahead of where most people see the danger on the horizon. One of the other areas that we wrote about extensively, and I covered extensively over the years, and now it's becoming quite apparent, is the European Union. Our correspondent Hilaire Duberrier had been writing about that for 50 years, since the beginning of what was then the European coal and steel community, and he had written about all of the people who were the socialists and one-worlders behind it right from the start. And he was kind of a lone voice at that time. He was a very close colleague of mine. I regarded him as one of my teachers and got very close to him. And Hilaire Duberrier really wrote the whole book on the history of the European, what we now know as the European Union. And this is very important because the European Union has destroyed the national sovereignty of its member states through deception, through bribery, through coercion. But all the while, when it was being proposed, and every step along the way, as it gained new powers, legislative, executive, and judicial powers, the designers, the architects of it, swore over and over again publicly, oh, this is not going to compromise our national sovereignty. This is not going to, not in any way going to overrule. We're not going to have a central bureaucracy that's going to ruin home rule, local rule. Now, as you pointed out earlier, now they come up, well, of course, we have to do it. We can't have a federal state without giving up national sovereignty. And now they're trying to promote that on a new level with this transatlantic trade and investment partnership with the United States, which is now President Obama has asked for fast-track authority to push through Congress. And so that's going to be one of that is one of the battles right because if they can push that through, then again, we have no recourse. We'll follow down the same road that the nations of Europe have gone in having transnational courts, transnational legislatures, parliaments, etc., control every aspect of our lives. There will be no recourse, as the people of Europe are finding now.
William, doesn't it come down to this? Doesn't it come down to the fact that big, mega wealthy love monopolies, as they openly talk about, because then there's no competition, and they just basically buy off the governments and then shut down their competition, and then on top of it, they're basically eugenicists who think there's too many people, so, you know, why not cut the resources off? I mean, what's at the bottom of the rabbit hole? If they get their world government, what are they going to set up?
Well, I think we can have history, as Patrick Henry said, have no lamp to guide my path except for the light of history. And we know that absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And we've seen that in every communist, Nazi, fascist dictatorship of any kind. And the fact that these folks who are promoting this now happen to be so-called respectable bankers and presidents and secretaries of state and whatnot. Once they have total power, they are human beings. That flows automatically. And when we know their actual history, many of these people are certifiable megalomaniacs. They want to have total power, and no one who has total power and wants total power will use it beneficently.
I agree. More and more we see an endgame, the billions of bullets, the armored vehicles, the army manuals saying, you know, that mainline Christian groups are bad. I mean, this is what you'd expect a weatherman to do if they were president. Do you agree with me that things are now moving at Mach speed because they're behind on their timetable, as Brzezinski has said? Or where do you see the world right now?
It's very clear that they have missed quite a number of very important datelines along the way. In terms of putting through, for instance, the free trade area of the Americas, in terms of getting the Declaration of Interdependence, all of these things which we've published numerous times. Where the carbon
tax 4 years ago, when that got leaked. I mean, we're having victories when we engage them.
Absolutely, and so there is a seeming frenetic activity going on. But, you know, if you go back to one of the signal manifestos of the One Worlders, the insiders in this regard, we've quoted it a lot. I'm sure you have as well. 1974, Foreign Affairs, Richard N. Gardner, CFR trilateralist, Columbia University professor emeritus of international law, blah, blah. I mean, he's served on a number of. He wrote a article called "The Hard Road to World Order," and it's one of the most important ones. There's many others like it, but yeah, one of the phrases that he used in there is he said, "As this happens, as we begin forming this world government through regional arrangements on environment, on the economy, on security, etc., it will look like a booming, buzzing confusion." In other words, there's going to be all this activity, and it's going to be hard for people to keep their eyes on it. But out of this confusion, they have a plan. It's going to create this new world order in which, through all these regional arrangements, the national sovereignties are destroyed, and the world order as it was of nation states is disaggregated, and then it is brought back together in this new aggregation of a new world order.
That's right, in new sub 10 region breakdowns, 10 FEMA regions, 10 global regions, 3 mega regions within that. And this is all
right,
public.
So this is happening on multiple levels, and I was at the.
Tell you what, stay there. We got to go to break. I want to come back and talk about this on the other side. Okay, if you go to drudgereport.com, there's a Daily Mail article about Misha, the supposed redhead guy that nobody could find for a week, who reportedly said it was all Alex Jones's fault that the guys basically did what they did, and then no one could say who actually talked to him in the Associated Press. And Kurt Nema put an article out today at Infowars.com saying nobody can find him. and saying, you know, this looks like a perfect cutout to make this up and demonize the internet. Well, sure enough, the Daily Mail did find him in Rhode Island. I want to send Dan Badandi over there to interview him. And so this just confirms Kurt's article that it's basically just made up, because he says it's made up and he didn't say those things. When you get that added to Kurt's article, Misha the radicalizer story hits a speed bump. The emerging narrative on the Boston bombing and the role allegedly played by the now deceased Tamerlan hinges on a shadowy figure the government calls Misha. It said the red-bearded Muslim lives in the Boston area but could not be located by authorities or the corporate media. Well, now he's been found. Daily Mail, drudgereport.com, right-hand side. We need to add that to this article. And it just adds to what Kurt was saying. So there you go. That story's been on Drudge since this morning. Okay, going back to our guest in this little segment, the next, and Gerald Celente is coming in. William F. Jasper of the New American Magazine, again, whether she were getting into being at these globalist meetings and how they operate. Go ahead.
Well, one of the very important ones where we see this convergence going on, and this is a very important term that I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, but they should be more and more familiar with, this convergence, where this was the plan after World War II, is first to build up the communist countries, where the Hegelian dialectic, where they would be a credible force against the free world, and then to have well, we can't have this constant threat of nuclear war. We're going to have some kind of convergence where we'll all come together. Well, we couldn't do that with communism being on what Lenin called war communism, antagonistic towards the rules, so we had to have peace communism. And so that's what's happened over the last 20 years. Supposedly communism has collapsed. Now we can converge peacefully with the communist countries, with China, Russia, etc. And I was at one of these, I've been at a number of the big convergence conferences. One of the big venues for this is Gorbachev's State of the World Forum, which I've been at virtually all of them. One of the big ones was in San Francisco in 1995, the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco. Gorbachev was there, had Ted Turner, Zbigniew Brzezinski, all of the big names from around the world there. And Zbigniew Brzezinski made his speech, which I reported on from there, and we recorded it. That's where he made his famous statement that we cannot leap into world government in one step. It has to occur through gradual step-by-step regional developments. And this, of course, is a restatement of what a number of other key one world, New World Order architects have stated, which we've reported on, which is that we have to have these regional arrangements which destroy the national sovereignty by linking country to country and region to region. And that's what we see happening through many of the different economic, security, military operations, because they recognize that most Americans, particularly, but other people in other countries as well, would be opposed to actually building the United Nations into one globalized central government. So they had to do it piecemeal. And so that's what we see happening here with the trade agreements, with environmental agreements, with now the security agreements, and this is what we see.
But they all cede authority to unelected corporate boards who can even exempt themselves from taxes and give themselves government contracts and too big to fail money. It is incredible. 5 more minutes with William F. Jasper from the New American Magazine. Then Gerald Celente, host. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the final segment I'm going to be hosting. I'm going to bring you in with Gerald Celente in the next segment and introducing for stations that join us. Most stations carry all 3 hours, but some only carry the third hour. Right now, William F. Jasper joins us. Hey, just briefly before you finish your points, it's only a 5-minute segment. How do people subscribe to the New American Magazine? Because even if you think you know everything about this, you will learn a lot there every month, and it's meticulously researched. And at the same time, people can then pay it forward, hand it off to other people. I mean, that's I cannot overstate. Anything I say is an understatement of the entire movement against the globalists. The original battle prospectus breakdown on their plan is from Mr. Welsh and you over the last 37 years and others, Mr. McManus. I mean, it's such a small group, too, and absolutely demonized, but knowing you're right. and they're probably 10 to 15 years behind their own documents. So God bless you. I mean, I salute everybody that's been fighting the globalists. Jim Tucker, American Free Press, just died. He helped fight them as well. But where do you see the future going? Because I know we can get into nuts and bolts. We'll have you back very soon. I don't know why it's every few years. If you'll come back, we'll have you back in a month. Maybe you can guest host sometime if you get good Skype and a good microphone. But Mr. Jasper, how do they subscribe, and where do you see this battle going in the future?
Okay, great. Easiest way is thenewamerican.com. We have both the print magazine, which you mentioned, and it's actually biweekly. And so 25 issues a year. We take a break one week, so it's 25 issues. It's $39 for the print, or you get $49 you get the print, and you can get it via email and PDF form as well. And there's a lot of exclusive stuff in the print magazine. While many of the major print magazines have folded or gone under in major newspapers, we're still holding in there, doing the actual hard copy print magazine. And,
please don't stop, because people really pay attention to hard copy. People really pay attention.
But then I have to stress also the online edition. We have 10 to 15 new articles a day that aren't going to be appearing in the print magazine. So there's some material that we include in both, but there's exclusive material online and in print. So it's a. And
now I see you guys linked up on the Drudge Report. The New World Order's got to hate that.
Yes. Well, this is one of the encouraging things, Alex, and that is that as it gets later and later in the game, as the lines begin to be drawn here, and people see, hey, wait a second, we're losing freedom every step of the way here. Let's find out about it. More and more people are waking up. The big question is, are we going to wake up enough people in enough time and get them going, getting us all shooting in the right direction? Figuratively, of course.
But I think we're going to win if everybody takes action. I mean, I really see us more and more gaining ground.
Well, one of the things you mentioned is that there's so much happening. They're speeding up this whole thing on a lot of different levels, and that is true. And I see part of it as desperation. They are, in fact, we've published a number of things showing that many of the people that are pushing this in Congress, but also in the think tanks at places like the Council on Foreign Relations and whatnot, they are saying amongst themselves, hey, we can't let the crazy people out there know what's going on. We can't let the American people know. They'll all go berserk over this. And so at areas, at venues like the World Economic Forum and other high globalist meeting places like this, they are acknowledging that, hey, we've got to step things up here. We've got to be more deceptive. We've got to undermine opposition within the political
And that's
party.
what they're doing, and it's only backfiring. William F. Jasper, thanks for spending an hour with us. I look forward to having you and other folks that you recommend on the broadcast. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the man, Gerald Celente, directly from Kingston, New York, is coming up straight ahead. He'll be hosting the broadcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming to you from Hot Springs, Arkansas, spending a few days with the family, but also hosting part of the broadcast with Jakari Jackson, David Knight, and our guest. But in the next 52 minutes, you're going to have the real treat of Gerald Celente, taking over the broadcast and covering a host of issues. In the last minute or so, Jakari Jackson will end the transmission until tonight's InfoWars Nightly News. But out the window, if you're watching on PrisonPlanet.tv, the Nightly News, you can see the Army-Navy Rehabilitation Center, part of which is still open here with the volcanic hot water baths. This town is basically rotting back into the hills. Once a vibrant place, but it's still one of the best places in America to visit. So I hope we can keep Hot Springs, Arkansas alive. I've been coming here since I was a small child, and I'm here with family now for a few days, but we're coming back to Austin today, ladies and gentlemen. But again, I am here in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and there is a shot via Skype out the window of that. I'm going to turn things over to Gerald Celente of thetrendsjournal.com. He's going to be covering Syria, White House Correspondents' Dinner, Bush Library, Italian government. He's also going to get into the Boston bombing, China, and positive measures to return prosperity to America. So we turn the InfoWars worldwide broadcast over to the top trends forecaster, Gerald Celente. Gerald, again, my friend, I want to thank you for joining us. And the helm, the comm is now yours, Captain.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real honor for me to be here today, Alex. And what I like to do during this segment is really what we do every day on Trends in the News. It's part of the subscription to the Trends Journal and their nightly broadcasts. Of course, they're not as long as the one I'm going to do now, but they average anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes. So let's start off with today's Trends in the News. And the first one of the ones you just mentioned, is that White House Correspondents' Dinner. You know, I was just listening to William Jasper of New American Magazine, and you, Alex, saying that, yes, we can change this. It can be changed. We don't have to go down this course. And if you don't believe me, look at the White House Correspondents' Dinner and how lame it is, and you think you're in a high school assembly. Just listen to some of this stuff.
I recognize that this job can take a toll on you. I understand second term, need a burst of new energy, try some new things, and then my team and I talked about it. We were willing to try anything, so we borrowed one of Michelle's tricks.
Listen to the prostitutes. That's enough. That's enough. Then you hear Conan O'Brien. You listen to the prostitutes clap on cue. It's disgusting. And what's more disgusting is how anybody could look up to this stuff. And you look at all the media that came out. Oh, Obama hit him with a 1-2 punch. Oh, Conan was fabulous. The guys are reading like this from their notes. And all the prostitutes laugh. They should be, it's a disgraceful spectacle of human beings acting at the lowest level. So you take this information, and this is what you're fighting. This is what you're up against. You're up against nothing. You've heard me say this before. I'll say it again. All these politicians are the same people you couldn't stand in high school and college that wanted to be class president and head of the student council. The suck-ups, the brown-nosers, the glad-handers, the overly ambitious and the insincere. And who are the prostitutes? The same clowns that were the journalists that ran the school newspapers. It's like they're talking to the principal of the school or the president of the college when they interview the president. So when I listen to Mr. Jasper, when I listen to Alex Jones, the future is ours, unless you think they're better than you are. So to me, it's very hopeful. You look at these clown acts, amateur hour for what it is. Let's move on. Gold. Whoop. Gold prices are up a little bit today. And they're up about 12% since when they bottomed out a few weeks ago. And I've said this before for those of you who haven't heard it before. My first buy of gold was in 1978 at $187.50 an ounce. I also bought gold on January 20th, 1980, at the high during the day at $875. It closed at $850. I remember what it felt like back then when the market was diving. Very different sentiment now. Back then, there was no Russia. Back then, there was no China. Russia was the Soviet Union. Everything east of Berlin was locked behind the Iron Curtain. The only thing people knew back then about China was Mao. India? They knew nothing about India. It's a global world now. You're seeing the people rushing in to buy gold as the prices are dropping because everyone knows that you cannot keep juicing the economy by printing more money. So look at the news today. Oh, on May 2nd, they're going to meet over there in the European Central Bank, and they're going to be lowering interest rates. That's the word coming out from the experts. And then you look what's going on. Why is the market even going up a little bit today? Read the information. They'll tell you why. There's Bloomberg. There's just a positive tone to the market, in part because recent lackluster economic trends have reinforced investors' belief that the Federal Reserve will continue to press on the gas pedal. And that's from Chad Morgenlander. And his firm, they oversee $130 billion. Gas on the pedal? You know what kind of language that is? I can't say this on this show, but the first letter is B and the second letter is S in saying the two words, because that's what that is. Gas to the pedal? No, it's pumping more worthless money into the economy and devaluing the currency. And it's going on globally, and that's why I believe in gold. Let's look at some of the headlines. This is from the New York Times, the self-proclaimed paper of record, of which I like to call it the toilet paper of record, considering the wonderful job they've done to take us to war for fake reasons and to keep propping up the lies and keeping the propaganda going. This is a great one. Karzai's office gets bags full of cash from the CIA. A decade of paying for Afghan influence. Can you imagine that? Don't have a job, the one you have stinks, can't pay your mortgage, don't have any rent money, can't make ends meet, don't worry about it. It's all outlined here. We call it ghost money, said Khalil Roman, who served as Mr. Karzai's chief of staff from 2002 to 2005. It came in secret and left in secret. All told, tens of millions of dollars. And it goes on and on and on. How this scam, the CIA's money, it's your money. Hey, cities are rotting. Alex is talking about how run down Little Rock looks. Don't worry about it. We got to send the money over there to the criminal group so that they could wash it and keep the wars going. You read the quotes in this paper, it is astounding the things they say. Yeah, CIA's money goes to paying off warlords. Nothing like a warlord. Oh, they're wonderful. You need a good warlord in your community. And politicians, many of whom have ties to the drug trade, and in some cases the Taliban. Yeah, wonderful. Go back to the correspondence dinner. Look who's running this country. Look who's making these decisions. If you or I to do anything like this so stupid in our jobs, we would be fired. But it's okay when the government does it. The headlines here are astounding. The cash does not appear to be subject to oversight and restrictions. No, hey, it's their money. The CIA's money. Where did they get it? They got it from you. This is where your tax dollars are going. No more foreign intervention. Everything they do, it's a loser. And you can't see a bigger loser than right over here on the front page of the toilet paper of record. So that's where it's all going. That's where it's heading. And it doesn't look very good. Yeah, these quotes are brilliant. Huh. Much of it also goes to keeping old warlords in line. Check this line out. This is from an old warlord, Mr. Dostrom. I asked for a year up front in cash so I could build my dream house. He was quoted as saying in a 2009 interview in Time magazine. That's right. He gets his $100,000 up front piles it up so he can build a home of his choice. So this is what we do on Trends in the News, because as we're talking about foreign affairs, here's another wonderful little story. Republicans warn of inaction on Syria. Oh, yeah, that guy again, that little chicken hawk, you know, Lindsey Graham. Yeah, calling for more war in Syria. Messed up in Afghanistan, Iraq's a bust, Libya down the tubes, let's go into Syria. Hi, this is Gerald Celente, hosting on the Alex Jones Show. An honor to be here. As I was talking about Syria when we went into the break, don't worry about it. The New York Times just reported, hey, them Islamists are taking over there in Syria. That's okay. They're everywhere. And you know who built the Islamist group, don't you? That was Jimmy Carter. Yeah. You remember the proxy war that the United States started giving money to people like Osama bin Laden and all the rest of them to fight the Russians when they were going into Afghanistan to stop the Russians? Yeah, those Islamists. So now they want more money, they want more intervention, people like Lindsey Graham calling for more action in Syria because it appears they're all suffering from attention deficit disorder. Clashes carry worries of a new civil war in Iraq. That's right, a new civil war in Iraq. That's the word coming out. But hey, why believe me? Look at the papers. Oh, 11 dead in another car bomb in Iraq. Wonderful. Yeah, but listen to what happened over when President Bush announced the opening of his new library. You know, President Obama said that he's drawing a red line that Syria can't cross. I wonder if he got the crayon from Bush to draw that red line. What a we! I love the language that they use. We're taking this off the table. That's the other lovely one they use. We're taking it off the table and we're drawing a red line. Islamist rebels create dilemma on Syria policy. Nowhere in rebel-controlled Syria is there a secular fighting force to speak of. And this is from the toilet paper of record. So, going back to how they keep screwing up and getting more opportunities to do so, Karl Rove, you remember him? That was Bush's front man, back man, side man, and man behind the scenes. Yeah, the porky pig of politics, Karl Rove. Here, Karl Rove on Bush legacy. He got the big things right. I do believe that the Iraq War was the right thing to do, and the world is a safer place for having Saddam Hussein gone. Don't you all feel happy? Don't you feel safe? Having a nice day? Who cares about Saddam Hussein? What a big lie, and how come these guys aren't brought up on war criminal charges to see who knew what when regarding WMDs, weapons of mass destruction? So Bush was interviewed by all of the prostitutes on all of the channels from the mainstream media, and they all sucked up. And all Bush kept saying, and all the mouthpieces are saying, is, let's let history decide. Oh, yeah, let history decide if Bush messed up or not. Why let history decide? Let's decide now with the facts. I'll tell you why they want history to decide. Here keeps going. Here he goes. The porky pig of politics, Karl Rove. The greats, you know, You can't touch George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, FDR, the greats. But yeah, I put George Bush up there, says Rove, who refers to a recent ABC Washington Post poll that found 40% approve of Bush as evidence that he will continue to be remembered more keenly as time goes by. He'll be remembered more keenly as time goes by because everybody will forget what a screw-up he was. He didn't even show up on Inauguration Day. That's right. That's how much the people hated him. They booed him. They booed him. No, it was Cheney that didn't show up. They booed Bush when he showed up with Obama. That they never booed a president, a leaving president before. Mussolini could have got elected after having 8 years of Bush. And guess what? We got him. Fascism. The merger of state and corporate powers. And we're going to look at more of that when we come back with trends in the news. And we're going to see why China is going to outbeat the United States as we keep going down. But there are other ways to go up, and we'll talk about those too. This is Gerald Celente on the Alex Jones Show. Hey, I'm back, and here's Dave Brubeck. Take 5. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Hey, that was before rap. You a hoe. God, I grew up with Dave Brubeck, man. I love that stuff. This is Gerald Celente back on live on Alex Jones Show doing some of our trends in the news. And when I left off, I was talking about what's going on in Syria, what's going on in Iraq, and how this military-industrial complex is destroying the nation. And I said I would also give some positive elements of how we could turn this around, move forward, and rise to higher levels economically, quality of life and quality of spirit, because it really comes back to morality. Here, from the toilet paper today, armed men surround ministry in Tripoli. At least 20 pickup trucks loaded with anti-aircraft guns block the roads while men armed with AK-47s and sniper rifles directed traffic away from the buildings around the ministry. Hey, I heard Obama say that they were going to bring freedom and democracy to Libya. I heard that little weasel chicken hawk Cameron and Sarkozy from France. You remember him? Yeah, the guy that's now, the former president of France. You know, the guy that now is going to be running a hedge fund if everything goes right, saying how they were going to free those people of Libya from their oil. You think we'd be in Iraq? You think we'd be in any of these countries? Oh, Libya, by the way, has some of the best sweet crude oil on the planet. The whole system is breaking down. Everything they touch, they turn to garbage. They destroy it. When the governments, we have no business intervening in anyone else's country. Period, paragraph. I am an American. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Declaration of Independence, and I believe in the principles upon which this country was founded. And when you see little cartoon characters like the Clintons and the Bushes and the Obamas doing their cheap routines and put them in a category with Madisons and Jeffersons and Washingtons, who warned us not to become engaged in foreign entanglements. Who are these little weasels like Lindsey Graham and McCain, insane McCain? And by the way, he's not a war hero. No. He crashed his plane a couple of times, couldn't land on the aircraft carrier, and if his old man wasn't an admiral, he would have been booted out. And what's he a hero for? Oh, he was flying over, bombing innocent Vietnamese, and they shot down his plane. That does not make you a hero. And these are the people that keep yelling for more war, more war. Bring home the troops, bring home the money, rebuild America. This is garbage what these guys are talking, and you know you're not going to get the truth, because all you have to do, if you want to torture yourself, as I did the other night, watch the president's White House Correspondents' Dinner, and you'll see the low level of human beings that call themselves journalists. I love that guy on CNN, Don Lemon. Perfect name for the cat. A lemon if there ever was one. But I digress a little bit. Let's move on to some more news. On the economic front, companies feel pinch on sales in Europe. This is from the front page of today's Wall Street Journal. Yeah, U.S. companies ranging from IBM, United Technologies, 3M, Xerox have missed revenue forecasts, hurt by a combination of Europe's malaise. You see, if I had the BS button now, that word malaise, it's not malaise. It's a depression. It's a depression in Greece. It's a depression in Spain. You're looking at unemployment rates that are approaching 30% officially. You're looking at over 52% unemployment, 57% unemployment rates in Spain among the youth. Same thing in Greece. 38% in Italy. Oh, Italy. They just elected a new government. Yeah. Here, look at this stupid photo. Look at this moronic photo. They're everywhere. Everywhere. We have moron leaders leading us everywhere. Because these are the kind of people that want to get the jobs. And you read about this clown that got in. Another guy that never worked a day in his life. What's his name over here? Enrico Letta. Yeah, Enrico Letta. Let his uncle, Gianni, was Berlusconi's chief political aide. Yeah. And you look at the new cabinet, the members from Three-Card Monte, the technocrat they put in there. One after another. Forget these labels that you hear on TV. Center left, center right. They're all a part of the financial mafia. That's all it is. There are two mafias running the show. The money changers mafia and the military-industrial complex mafia. It's a dictatorship of finance. It's the merger of state and corporate powers. One after another, you go down the list, and every one of these Italian cats that are in high positions are Eurocentric, Euro-favored guys and women that want to take more power away from the people and centralize it under the money changes. Euro is a failure. Italy, Spain, Greece, Portugal, Ireland, they're suffering the worst downturn since the Great Depression. The euro is a failure. It's only 12 years old. It's finito. They should bury it, but they're going to prop it up because it's easy when you have a centralized currency, a centralized bank, to steal your money. It makes it a lot easier to do in a lot of smaller deals. And a guy yesterday went berserk in Italy. Mayhem greets Italy's, quote, grand coalition of mobsters. Here, this is the guy. Luigi Preti, 46, unemployed, and apparently driven to desperation, opened fire with a pistol, wounding 2 police officers. This is from the Financial Times. Unemployed, apparently driven to desperation. When people lose everything and have nothing left to lose, they lose it. And that's what we're seeing more and more of. Let's move on to some other news here. What do we got here in the Wall Street Journal? Oh, more about those Boston bombers. This is a big story. Talk about the 19-year-old is being treated for gunshot wounds in his throat, head, and legs that he received during confrontations with police days after the April 15th bombing. I'd be hitting the BS button on that one. You know why? You remember the story. The story was in the Washington Post. The story was all over the media. That's right. There was a confrontation. You heard the word. There was a confrontation. They found him in the boat. Remember? The guy goes outside, he's having a smoke, sees the tarp on his boat's not put on right, sees some blood stains. There's the kid lying there wounded. And what did the cops do? You remember the first story. They exchanged gunfire. Yeah, that's right. They had, what, 9,000 troops there? They could have, they could have led the Battle of the Bulge. They had enough equipment and men and armaments. So no, the gun battle never happened. It was a lie, just like the other lie, or misinformation, excuse me. Misinformation about how they also robbed the 7-Eleven that they never robbed. So why would anybody believe anything? But here's the way they wrote it. Again, this is from the Wall Street Journal, received during confrontations with police. No, they shot into the boat. The kid was lying there. Could they say, come out, your hands up? Whatever happened to that one? What else do we have? Iceland. Iceland votes out pro-European leadership. Yay, yay, yay. Little Iceland. Tiny little Iceland. They didn't pay back the bankers. They're having a tough time over there. But they're not robbing the people of their money to give it to the banking operations. A little bit closer to home because, again, I was listening to the opening of the show with Mr. Jasper and how things have to change. And, of course, when Alex Jones' show, he always talks about, stopping the corruption and bringing the nation back to the people. Here's a little story in Sunday's New York Times. Many openings at state agency goes to those with ties to Governor Cuomo. I'm only mentioning this because it's the same thing everywhere. If you read about the guy they just arrested in Bosnia, the guy in France that was supposed to be cracking down on tax evaders, that minister. And then they found out he had a couple of $1 million in a Swiss account. It's the same thing everywhere. And nothing is going to change, nothing, until the morality changes. And the fish rots from the head up. So we learn by our leaders. We learn by those in power. And the power is corrupt from the top down. Here, New York State's Economic Development Agency. Economic development agencies, by the way, I got my master's degree in public administration. They're a waste of money. All they do is they give benefits to the very rich. Hey, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a hotel in your dying town over here. I want a $10 million tax break. I want loan guarantees and some infrastructure repairs, and they do it, which they should never do. But anyway, in New York State Economic Development Agency created a new position last June, a new position. We're paying taxes like crazy, and they're creating a new position. And they found a candidate to fill it, a young man named Willard Younger. Yeah, young Willard Younger, who had just graduated from Colgate University with a degree. Now, check it out. If you want a degree in worthlessness, This guy couldn't do better, but I have one better, actually, and you'll hear that one, too. A degree in classics and religion. Now, you know what a degree in classics and religion gets you? It gets you a job with the Economic Development Agency, a special projects assistant, at a salary of $45,000 a year. Now, wouldn't you think if they put an ad out for a projects associate at a salary of $45,000 a year, they could have actually gotten somebody qualified with experience? Or could it be, I mean, being, there are several million people in New York. His father, Stephen P. Younger, is a lawyer and power broker in legal circles who was a member of one of Governor Andrew M. Cuomo's transitions team, and he's also donated $26,000. Yeah, to Mr. Cuomo's campaign over the years. Oh, nice. Oh, donated campaign. You know what these are called in real language? No, they're not campaign donations. They're called bribes and payoffs, and you saw the payoff. That's why I'm a believer in direct democracy. The whole system is rigged, and if you're not in it, you don't get anything from it. This story actually gets a lot better, It's one stupid thing after another. And the jobs that these guys get. There's this other guy, Mr. Molis. He was hired at $75,000 a year as a strategic planner associate. He graduated with a degree in ASSYRIOLOGY, Assyriology, the study of ancient Mesopotamia. Yeah. His ties, his father and his father's real estate firm have donated a total of $75,000 to the Cuomo campaign. So I guess they broke even on that one, huh? 75 into the campaign, 75 a year into his son's pocket. The whole game is rigged all over the world. So the stock market's going up a little bit today. How come? Well, as I said earlier, good news, good news. The Fed's going to keep its foot on the pedal. That's right. Pumping more money. That's boosting the market. Now, this is important. Interest rates, as we know, are at historic lows. So the other reason that the market's going up is pending home sales increased 1.5%. After a revised 1% decline the prior month. It was 0.4% when it came out with this number. Now remember, 1.5%. This is after dumping trillions of dollars into the economy. This is after keeping interest rates at record lows. And this is after the FHA are giving out loans with people only putting down 5%. So you can see, even with all of this juice going in, it's not going to be a happy ending. And again, that's why I believe in gold. Gold is golden because they're going to keep having to pump more money into it. It ain't working. Not going to work. But don't worry. They'll get us to war, and that'll get your mind off it. Last segment. Thank you, Alex Jones. This is the Alex Jones Show, and this is Gerald Celente giving you an example of our Trends in the News that we do every Monday through Friday as part of your subscription to the Trends Journal. Now, I said I was going to give some positive elements, say a little bit more about China. China's going to do better than the United States. I don't believe China's going to go to war. They're building their internal economy. They have 1.2 billion people there, and they have a lot of business to do with each other. And that's where they're going to go in the future. And that's the way America should go. That's the way Italy should go. You know my saying, think for yourself. That's the way I see it. I want my money staying in my country. I don't want it going anywhere. Anywhere in foreign aid, anywhere in foreign products. I want to buy shoes from America. I want to buy my shirts made in America. And I want to buy all my product local. And boy, do we have great local product up here in colonial Kingston in the heart of the Hudson Valley. I just had some capicola that they made over here locally that was as good as I've had in Italy. The way we bring this back is we do business with each other, just like the Chinese are going to do. And hey, if it's good enough for the Chinese, why shouldn't it be good enough for us? Or maybe you want to buy that next shirt from another sweatshop that blows up, burns down, or is destroyed in Bangladesh that just killed 400 people. So you could go shopping at a large self-storage unit that they call Walmart or Target. Buy local. And number one, again, think for yourself, only what I'm saying, break the chains. If you're going to go out for a cup of coffee, break the chains. Go local. Break the chains. We become corporate slaves. Unless, of course, you go to Colgate and your old man gives Cuomo money or whatever other state you live in. Then you'll get a good job with your degree in worthlessness. So those are some positive elements. The future doesn't have to be the way it's going. We create the future. Again, go back to the beginning of this program. Look at that correspondence dinner. Look at these low-life politicians. Look how low they have taken this nation. So I want to thank Alex Jones. I love being on this show. Keep up the good fight. Everyone join in. And now I want to turn it over to Jakari Jackson. This is Gerald Celente, and that was some of today's Trends in the News.
All right, Jakari Jackson back here live. Is Gerald still with us? I just want to ask Mr. Celente, if I can ask you, you ended talking about China. How do you feel about the Chinese market telling us how to make our movies, demanding edits to movies like World War Z and Iron Man 3?
Hey, the Chinese own our money. You know, they're buying up all the movie theaters. They're buying up a whole chain of movie theaters. You know that. They own a big chain. So, you know, they're in control. The golden rule. Those who have the gold rule.
Exactly, exactly. Now, Mr. Celente, how can people get a hold of your materials?
Trendsjournal.com, trendsjournal.com. And Jakari, we know that people are having a difficult time, you know, making ends meet. We have a discount request page there. We try to make the Trends Journal available to everybody so that they can prepare for the future. There's a bright future for those who see the future and move in the right directions. All
right, Gerald Celente, definitely appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Jakari.
All right, well, that's it for this edition of the Alex Jones Radio Show. Thanks to Mr. Celente, Alex, David Knight, and everybody else who had a hand in this, the great crew working overtime. Alex will be back, or at least Skyping in, I should say, tomorrow. Also, myself, maybe David Knight will be back in here as well. So InfoWars Nightly News tonight. David Knight will be hosting. Sybil Edmonds, will be our guest. We'll see you then.
It shot up to 71% people saying that they would give up their freedom for security, the promise of security. And then it kind of held there for a couple of years, and then it started dropping. And what's interesting about this poll is the timing. This was one day after the bombing, and it was pretty close, but there were, it was like 45 to 43%, that were 45% said, no, we don't want to give up any liberties for this. So that was kind of interesting. The other thing I find interesting is the way that poll broke down. Democrats overwhelmingly still are buying the idea that government can make them safe, 51% to 36%. Republicans were essentially equally divided. Independents is where our hope lies.
Yes.
Now, because the independents, it was only 29% willing to sacrifice their freedom for the promise of security. 58% said no.
And that's what we keep seeing. People are waking up. It's the paradigm shift. People are getting new information, new sources of information. They're turning away from the mainstream and going to alternative sources. And even InfoWars don't believe what we say. Go and check things for yourself. And speaking of people who took things into their own hands, I want to do this quick article, Dave, and we can come back with your thoughts. 30 arrested in New York during rally against drones. Now, this is at the Hancock Air Force National Base, and it says a group of people lying on the base's driveway were arrested. Charges include disorderly conduct, obstructing a government administration, and loitering. So it just makes me laugh that, you know, the simple act of lying on the ground non-combatively is now viewed as obstructing justice, or disorderly conduct, I should say, obstructing the government administration.
Look at what Bloomberg does in New York. I mean, I remember stories about people who couldn't smoke, guys who had a barbershop, they couldn't smoke in their shop, so they stood out in front of it, smoked a cigarette, then they got a ticket for loitering for a couple $100. So.
Okay, well, this is the end of the first segment. We'll be back right after this break with more news. All right, welcome back to the Alex Jones Radio Show. Jakari Jackson and David Knight sitting in. Alex will be joining us at 11:40, so stay tuned for that. If you're watching on PrisonPlanet.tv, you see the article right there. Bilderberg sleuth Jim Tucker dead at age 78. So our condolences go out to Jim and his family. Alex talked about it yesterday on the Sunday show. I'm sure he'll have more information coming up a little bit later on. So I'll throw back to David. David, you had more points you wanted to make on our last topic.
Yeah, you know, we were talking about people waking up and realizing that government was actually a bigger threat to them than terrorism. And the actuality of it is very true. When you go down and you look at the actual actuarian figures and see the likely cases of how people are going to die, it's a little known fact. But according to the U.S. Department of State, only 17 U.S. citizens were killed worldwide as a result of terrorism in 2011. That's the year that we have, most recent year we have statistics for. That includes deaths in Afghanistan and Iraq, and everywhere where we're at war. Only 17 people.
And people will use that as a talking point. Well, that just shows TSA works. Well, TSA isn't really catching anybody, because even in situations like the underwear bomber, TSA didn't stop that guy. It was the passengers on the plane that jumped to action, not the TSA.
That's right. And as Alex has pointed out over and over again, you know, things like drowning is way up there. I mean, you have people that drown, that's like 18,000 people, okay? 1,000 times more likely to drown than you are to get, you know, hit by a terrorist attack. But of course, we all know it's things, diseases like heart disease, cancer, that sort of thing. That's really what you need to worry about.
Car accidents.
Exactly. But it is, you know, when it's the absurdity, just like we saw in Boston. One teenager with no military training or experience, and we find out he had no gun on him, and yet look at what they did in terms of martial law in Boston. That was to establish a pattern. That was to establish a pattern of the way the police can operate, and we're already seeing them repeat that pattern in various other cities. There were 2 other places where they did it just this last week. They're setting a pattern just like they did with SWAT teams. You know, that came in with a police chief in L.A., and everybody said, oh, look at this, and before you know it, it spread all across the country. We're going to see these types of tactics all across the country. Now is a time for people to get active at the state and local level. Find some representatives who are going to be on your side, or elect some who are going to be on your side, and start getting some accountability on police, and stop this militarization, and take it back another step and say, we're going to hold police accountable when they use tasers as whips, or they do other things, violence that we see no accountability happening at the local level now. But it's really going to get out of hand unless citizens get active and demand some accountability and some, essentially, an effective Bill of Rights, you know, from local police. It's what we really need to see happening now.
Exactly. Because people don't want to get active. They think, well, I mean, people have the idea that you can work at the national level, and you can. I do encourage you to contact your national representatives and such, but you have to get at the local level. You have to go talk to your sheriff and your police chief and your city councilman and your mayor. And if you're like us here in Austin, maybe they might not be the best representatives, but right. I mean, if you can, vote them out.
A different one.
Get some people in there who will do the will of the people, not the will of the feds, or, you know, Joe Biden or whoever else. So, and speaking of Joe Biden, this dovetails over to the President Obama report. Obama spent twice as much time on vacation and golf as the economy. Now, this is out of Breitbart, and you can see that he spent more time on the golf course than he did in any type of economic meeting.
You know, I might say that might be a good thing, Jakari.
Maybe it was a good thing.
Maybe it's a good thing we don't get all the government that we pay for. You know, if I would hate to think if he was enacting a rigorous economic plan on us, what that would look like. So let's encourage him to go golfing more.
Well, my deal is, you know, he spends all this tax money to go play golf with Tiger Woods and, you know, whoever else, and I don't know what all he has going, but then he sends his daughters on these $1 million spring break vacations to Mexico and so forth, and you know, you got the Secret Service and, you know, guys hiding in trees trying to make sure nobody's trying to talk to him and all this stuff. It's just, it's over the top. It's a waste of money. Meanwhile, you can't take a tour of the White House because of sequestration. Yeah.
Well, they're royalty, you know. They're our American royalty, and they live a lifestyle of the rich and famous and then some. It's just pretty amazing. You know, talking about money, this is an article that's on InfoWars. The more illegal immigrants that go on food stamps, the more money J.P. Morgan makes. How about that? It turns out they've made over $500 million just on processing fees for people who are getting food stamps and that sort of thing. So they get anywhere from 31 cents to $2.30 for every single person on food stamps. So they're making hundreds of millions of dollars off of this. And when you see this kind of thing happening, it's no wonder that, you know, we have a welfare state. It's just like the welfare state, just like the military-industrial complex, is being run largely for the benefit of the big corporations and banks at the very top.
Right.
Just like you see a $500 million tank that the Army doesn't want. You see fighter jets that the Air Force doesn't want. You see a vertical takeoff and landing plane that the Marines don't want. And yet, you've got congressmen from both political parties pushing for these things that the military doesn't want. Why? Because it makes money for the people who are really running this. That's the military-industrial complex. You know, the Army doesn't want the tank. The Army doesn't want the war, most of them, right? Because they're going to be the ones who are going to be fighting and dying in it. But the wars and the tanks are what make the money for the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about.
And people, you know, they can't see the connection that these people make huge sums of money off of war. They don't make money in peacetime. You know, they have tanks and guns and bullets and other things that they profit off of, and people just can't wrap their head around the concept that maybe we're starting wars unnecessarily to push that type of agenda.
Well, think about it. It's a durable goods, right? One of the problems that they have in the automobile industry is that they started making cars that were much more durable. They wouldn't wear out in just a couple of years, so they're not able to sell them that often. You go back to the 70s, it was only in Switzerland that they were making, not Switzerland, in Sweden, that they were making cars that would last for 11 years or whatever, right? But because of competition, Detroit started making cars that lasted longer, so they're having some problems. Now, if they were military-industrial complex type of mentality, what they would be doing, they'd be sending out agents to sabotage traffic lights and traffic signs so they could create accidents so people would die or whatever, but they'd have to replace those cars because that's what the military-industrial complex is doing when they manipulate the foreign policy. And in the same way, we see the welfare state being manipulated for the benefit of bankers and big corporations. In this situation where J.P. Morgan is making $500 million, they have a flyer that they give to Department of Agriculture, gives out to people on food stamps, and in boldface underlined it says in Spanish, "You need not divulge information regarding your immigration status in seeking this benefit for your children."
And we talked about that a little bit yesterday. Yeah. And I gave the example, you know, I'm definitely against biometrics, but in the state of Texas, you have to get your fingerprints taken to get a Texas driver's license. I don't like it, but that's what I had to do. But we saw
it is your PrisonPlanet.tv memberships that fund so much of what we do here on this operation. And then we're more than happy for the TV show after it's aired live, then be leaked out onto the web to tens of millions of people. That's our goal.
It is Monday, April 29th, 2013. I'm Jakari Jackson along with David Knight. This is the Alex Jones Radio Show. Alex Jones will be joining us at 11:40, so stay tuned for that just at the bottom of the hour. Also, we have guest host Gerald Celente, and Alex will be interviewing William Jasper from the New American, so definitely look forward to that. David, I see you have a few articles there.
Yeah, Jakari, we've got a lot of information breaking about the CIA's connection to the Boston bombings. There was one in particular, Uncle Ruslan, turns out, and this was covered on InfoWars, but actually I think the story was broken by Sibel Edmonds. I don't know. She covered it on Saturday, but she's actually been covering the CIA guy that's been associated with Uncle Ruslan for a long time. This is not news. He was actually on her rogue gallery that she had, American Deep State Rogue Gallery, and there were some gag orders put on her, but she's been writing about his connections to setting up Islamic false flag operations throughout Turkey and Chechnya and the Chaos Stan area, essentially, for quite a long time. We're going to be having an interview with Sibel on the nightly news tonight. So I want everybody to tune into that because it's going to connect a lot of dots, a lot of things that are not being reported by the mainstream media, but that all really kind of tie into this bombing. And like I said, this Graham Fuller, the CIA guy that has connections to Uncle Ruslan, is right at the center of all of that.
Exactly. So be sure to turn into the InfoWars Nightly News, 7 p.m. Central. David Knight will be hosting. Now, I just want to go over a few articles in this short segment. This is available on Infowars.com from Washington's blog. Multiple polls. Americans are more afraid of the government than terrorists. Now, since 9/11, we've seen people give up all kinds of liberties and the promise, and I just say the promise of security. But we have this article right here. It says, according to a pair of recent polls, for the first time since 9/11, the 9/11 terrorist hijackings, Americans are more fearful of their government than the abuses of terrorists, and you can see they want their constitutional liberties as well. The polls suggest Americans are hesitant to give up any further freedoms in exchange for increased, quote, security. And I like how the article says it right there. That's all it is the promise of security.
That's right.
So, David,
you know, I think it's interesting. If you look at this article a little bit further down, what it says is that right after the 9/11,
we see in other states where they're telling immigrants, you don't have to give your fingerprints or whatever else, just come get your driver's license. And it's a similar thing with the entitlement programs.
Exactly. You cannot have an open borders and an open-ended welfare system, right? I remember years and years ago, they used to have this thing called a Nolan chart that they would do in the Libertarian Party, see where people were trying to get them out of this left-right paradigm. So it basically changes this straight line into a two-dimensional space. And they would have like 10 questions on personal liberty, 10 questions on economic freedom and that sort of thing. And one of the questions would be about open borders. And my position on it was you cannot have open borders. I mean, you cannot have open immigration unless you first end the welfare state. And it will bankrupt you. And that's basically what we have now, though, is that we have fully open borders. They've essentially opened the borders, but they are hyping up the welfare state to a new dimension. And what that means is that it's just making people who are working legally in this country, is burdening them, and it's also keeping people who really do need some help from being able to get it because of the massive amount of money that's being wasted and misdirected.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge amount misdirected and going to people who don't really need it. People can't get the assistance that they need. And, you know, it's like say we talk about entitlement programs. You know, if you need something temporarily, that's one thing, but you're not supposed to be on it to the point where you become dependent, lifelong recipient of this thing. And it's definitely hurting people because they don't want to get out, or they don't know how to work, maybe I should say. Yeah. They're so entitled to getting their check in the mail every month that, you know, they don't know how to go out there and fill out job applications and, you know, work a 40-plus hour week and so forth.
Well, what's in it for the corporations like J.P. Morgan is, of course, money. But what's in it for the politicians, the reason they push this is they want you to be dependent on them. And just as we said before, there's a left-right division here, and for the people on the right, they want to get you afraid of Islamic terrorism, even though, like we just said, only 17 people worldwide, including theaters of war, were killed by terrorists. They want you so afraid of terrorism and Islamicists that you're going to come running to them for safety. And for the people who are on the left, they want you dependent on them economically.
Right.
And so in both cases, politicians push this agenda because it empowers them and it takes power away from the people.
Exactly. Now I want to move to international news in our news blitz here. I have this article right here. Powerful blast injures up to 40 in Prague. A powerful explosion badly damaged an office building in the center of the Czech capital Monday, injuring up to 40 people. Authorities believe people still may be buried in the rubble. So definitely our thoughts and prayers go out to the people in that location.
That's something that it's amazing because C. Bell Edmonds was talking about how Americans knew so little about Chechnya that they were thinking that the Chechen area was actually Czechoslovakia.
Oh, yeah.
And now we have a terrorist event in Prague, Czechoslovakia.